I'm going to call this meeting to order at 1 p.m. It is August 6, 2019. This is a special business meeting. And at this time, will you please stand and join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Dr. Moxley, would you please explain the purpose of the meeting?
Yes, good afternoon, board members, and to our guests that are here with us this afternoon. The purpose of our special meeting is to have presentations for interviews of the superintendent recruitment firms that have submitted proposals. We also have a consent agenda item, since we are at the beginning of the school year, to keep personnel recommendations moving forward. And we will end our afternoon with any budget discussion items on our tentatively approved budget.
Okay. So at this time, we're going to adopt the orders of the day. Are there any items board members wish to move from consent to action? Nope. Okay, I need a motion.
Move approval.
Okay, Mrs. Justice with a motion. Would you care to speak to your motion?
No, ma'am, thank you.
Dr. Schiff? Any further discussion? Nope. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
5-0. This is the citizen input portion of our meeting. Do we have any forms? No?
Forms.
Okay, at this time, we do not have any citizen input. We are going to move into our presentations, which is with our two candidates that have submitted for interviews of the superintendent recruitment. And I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Moxley at this time to explain.
Yes, at this point in time, we welcome Andrea Messina, Dr. Bill Vogel, and John Reichert from FSBA. They submitted a proposal, and we will have 40 minutes for a presentation and then 15 minutes for questioning.
Actually, it's
20 minutes.
it's 20.
Oh,
20
I'm
minutes.
I
Because it's
apologize.
1 hour total for
Yes.
each group.
Okay, yes, okay, great. Thank you, and we'll turn it over to Mrs. Messina.
All right, well, thank you. As you all know, because we've met many times in the past, I'm Andrea Messina, the Executive Director of the Florida School Boards Association. And with me here today is our entire superintendent search team, Dr. Bill Vogel and Mr. John Reichert. As you know, our superintendent search team is comprised of 3 people. We look at it as 3 legs to a stool. Oh, I see what's happening here. The problem is my computer doesn't go with this. The first the first leg of the stool is myself, the Executive Director of the School Boards Association, and a former school board member. So I bring with me the school board member perspective. The second member of our team is Mr. Bill Vogel, Dr. Bill Vogel, who's a former superintendent, former Florida Superintendent of the Year. He brings the superintendent perspective. And the third member of our team is Mr. John Reichert, who brings the HR perspective as a retired HR professional and director of human resources. So the 3 of us with the HR, superintendent, and school board member perspective, we believe bring not just a well-rounded perspective to be able to guide board members, but also to be able to answer questions and guide candidates along the way. That's one of the things that we receive some of the most positive feedback on, is how we work with the candidates throughout the process to be able to address their needs and their concerns and try to help make sure that their packages are complete and that everything they need to have in is received and is in. So when we ask the question of why should you choose our firm, first I want to point out that in Florida, as you all know, we don't have every county with an appointed superintendent. However, there are a number of them. There are 26 districts, if you include the 3 that just changed from elected to appointed, who will be appointing to start date of November of 20. So within those counties, we've worked in all but one in superintendent placement services at some point or another in the 80-year history of the Florida School Boards Association. But we also work with these counties just as boards, members of our association. So we know Florida. But we don't just know the boards and we don't just know the districts. We also know the administrators that are coming up through the pipeline. I'll give you an example of something that we did just Sunday night. We worked with FASA, which you may know is the Florida Association of School Administrators Association, and their executive director, a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Mixon, whom some of you probably know, came over to me recently and said, listen, there seems to be a bunch of superintendent openings, and my members are calling with questions, that sort of stuff. So I said, well, hey, why don't we do an informational webinar? We'll do it on a Sunday night so it doesn't impede on their school time. And we, Bill and I were the presenters, we'll explain to them the process, we'll explain to them, you know, what kind of things they need on their resumes, what kind of experiences boards are looking for, we'll answer their questions. So we do invest in developing a, I guess you'd call it a bench of candidates, a pool of candidates, and try to help young administrators or aspiring superintendents to get the sorts of experiences that they need to round out their resume so that they can be good candidates for districts like yours. What I've done here is I have changed the stars to those districts that we know we have already worked with. This team, this exact team sitting before you, has worked with in the last 5 years. You'll notice we have Manatee, we have Volusia, we have, oh, I'm sorry, I clicked here and not there. Thank you. You know what, John, I'm going to put you in charge of that one. I'm going to do this one, okay. So these are the districts that we have personally worked with as a team over the last several years. We're currently working in Volusia. They have a superintendent start date of January 1, but a hire date earlier in November. So their search will probably be completed before, based on what I understand you're looking towards. I'm guessing you're going to be sometime after January, but theirs is going to end January 1. We're also currently working in Escambia. They have a November 2020 start date because of the end of the elected to the appointed, and we're going to be working in Martin County, which also will have the November 2020 start date. Those are the districts that we are currently working in, and those are the ones that you see here. With regard to our national connections, I want to speak briefly about an organization called NASS, which is the National Affiliation of Superintendent Searchers. The reason that we believe that is one of the most valuable connections that we bring to the table is that, as you know, I'm the executive director in Florida, but there are executive directors in every other state in the country. So when a candidate from another state applies in our state, the first thing I do is pick up the phone and call the executive director in whatever state the candidate is from so that we can get a background and a knowledge of kind of how that administrator works, but more importantly, so that I can get the names and phone numbers of the board chair so that I can pass that information on to the board, to the district school board members where the candidate has applied, because we believe it's important for board members to talk to board members, because you know what other boards want. So having an immediate access to that is very valuable. I'll give you an example. I got a text, I want to say it was even on Sunday, from the executive director in Virginia who had a candidate from Florida applying for superintendent in one of her districts. She says, hey, do you know anything about this person? I reached out to a few people and people didn't know. So then I went, while I was waiting for board members to get back to me, I reached out to some other people. Board members got back to me. They said, yeah, they knew the person. I said, can I give them your name and number? Can they contact you directly? Boom, it happened within truly less than an hour and a half, 2 hours. We were able to really get that information. It doesn't always work so quickly, but having the immediate contact and the immediate response from my peers, my work-alike group, we have found to be extraordinarily valuable. And it's through the network of affiliated superintendent searchers. We belong to that network, and every other state's superintendent searchers belong to that network. We, through the superintendent searches, also have immediate access to resources in other states that can give us information. We believe that our network is both immediate and responsive, but it's also, we help each other in finding new ways and recruiting candidates. We know people that maybe want to leave Florida. We know people who maybe want to come to Florida because of our contacts in other states. We also know that there are some traditional candidates that some districts make a priority, and so we try to reach out through our network to try to help recruit some of those. You all know, because you've had the experience with us previously, that we do on-site representation. We show up at your meetings, we come to your workshops, we make sure that you have the materials you need to have effective and efficient workshops. So we're available to do that in the same way during a regular search as you all experienced during the interim search. We respond. I think you all have had experience with us before, that if you need something, you can communicate with us pretty directly. You'll get a pretty immediate response. The same is true not just for the members of the board, but also the candidates and the media. We recognize the importance of communicating. We'll work with your media within the parameters that you define. Typically, the media, we try to have a district contact, usually the attorney, but every now and then they'll communicate with me and ask some general questions about general superintendent searches kind of statewide. And so I can do that, but if it has to do with individual candidates, we refer them straight to the district. We really understand Florida's public records and Florida's sunshine laws. We understand how all of the work that we do has to be maintained. We recognize that when somebody makes a public records request, it reflects both on the board, the district, and us, and so we make sure that all of those laws are followed. We understand those laws. The one thing that we have that we believe other firms don't have is a full and complete understanding of Florida laws, Florida school districts, Florida education, and even to the point of the districts itself. We understand that some districts have different politics at play. We understand that some districts have different community groups that are active, and there's a lot of nuances that go into running an effective search within parameters of any given district. Every search is unique. No search is exactly the same, mostly because of those nuances, and we are responsive to those nuances. We want to make a search that works for you and your community. We recognize that while I live in Tallahassee, these two gentlemen happen to live in Seminole County, so the travel is less than if we lived out of state for sure. And when we have, just so you know, when we have multiple searches going on at the same time, there are three of us, a different one of us is the lead, if you will, on each search. So each board knows exactly the one person with whom they'll have immediate contact. And if districts were to have, if two districts doing a search were to have events on the same evening, then the person who's the lead in that district is the one that would show up at that district, and the person who's the lead at another district would show up at that district. So we can divide and conquer. We've done it many, many times. We have connections, and we have had long-term active participation in Florida in education associations and activities, so our network is deep and wide. These gentlemen are in counties all the time. I think they've even been in this county. I think you've been in this county, haven't you? Yeah. And I know you came before too. So we've had a number of different experiences in and out of districts throughout the state. And we just really feel as though our knowledge of the state and your district can be what's most beneficial to you during a search. We certainly use a team approach. We all work together. We communicate with each other. Typically, we've done it every Sunday night. We sort of get together. Where are we on this? What's next in this county? What do we need to do here? Who's in charge of that? Who's going to make sure this happens? So that we as a team can make sure to meet your needs. And we also work with your superintendent once you decide who you're going to hire to try to help to create an onboarding plan for that superintendent, a training plan for the board and superintendent together, however you want to structure that. But we recognize that the single most important thing once you hire a superintendent is that you all work together to ensure that that superintendent is going to be successful with this board. And so whatever we can do to really help and reinforce that is what we bring to the table. As you know, We recommend that you would look at your performance evaluation instruments, your goal setting, things like that, which are part of bringing a new superintendent on. You want to review those sorts of processes. We can certainly help and provide support in that area as well. And then at this point, I would ask Dr. Vogel if he wanted to add anything, and then we'll see if Mr. Reichert would like to add anything. Dr. Vogel?
Sure, thank you very much. One of the things that we do, and Andrew gave us a perfect lead into it, is we look at the goals that the district sets forth and the board. And looking at some of the areas that were important to you from our past work, you wanted to restore confidence and understanding of the district budget and financial health. I know you've made a lot of progress in that, and we're available to support you in that area. And what's really helpful is when we know what the goals of the board are, it helps us when we're recruiting candidates for your positions, and we know the background of those. Another was to continue improvement of student academic achievement, and what I do is when the grade categories come out, we look at those and we analyze where the district is, so we know what the areas of priority are for the district to improve academic achievement. And I know the goal of this district is to become an A, and it's very, very possible that that could happen in a very short period of time. The third, which we saw, was to continue progress addressing the desegregation order and related issues. And Mr. Reichert and I have personal experience. Mr. Reichert has out-of-state experience in the area of HR and working with districts on desegregation issues. I have personally led 2 districts, one with John, in which those districts have achieved unitary status. So we're very informative on that particular area. Another one was to move your strategic plan forward, and that is very critical. That's one of the priorities of the board, and that's one of the things that when we're looking at candidates and the board would look at, then we will make sure and look to people who've had that experience that they could bring forward. And what we try to do as we get started is we learn as much about the district as we can so we can match candidates with what the board priorities are. Thank you.
John?
Just the only comment, Andrew was talking about some of the couple of searches we currently have going on, and kind of being the scheduler and the kind of put the schedules together person with those 2 current searches. We have no conflicting dates between those 2 searches. So it is one of the goals that we look at. If we have more than 2 searches, that we do look at all the flexibility we have to really avoid any conflicts in dates.
Yeah, I'd also like to say one of the things that we see in a superintendent search is it's an opportunity to showcase the school district through a very exciting brochure, and also it's an opportunity to go out in the community and get input from the community on the search and make the community as part of the search. As part of our process, we have a menu of community involvement opportunities that we would discuss with the school board. And unlike others, if you have a community forum in the community, we go out and actually will facilitate that for you. Usually a board member will be there also, and we've had great success at involving the community in our searches, and it's really served the board and the community well, selection of the superintendent. And finally, I would say, and Andrea touched on it a little bit, is we are here and available after the superintendent is selected. We work with the school board attorney on designing the contract terms. We're a liaison for that if it's necessary. We provide a mentoring through the Florida Association of District School Superintendents. John and I both also work for that organization. We can provide any training through the School Board Association. And I always say the best thing is if the superintendent if there's something that's happening, all you have to do is call us, and we'll do everything we can to get everything back on track. Thank you.
Happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay. So what that does, it leaves us 8 minutes each with a 7-minute wrap-up if we stay according to our schedule. So I would like to open it up for, I'll start down here with Mrs. Barenborg.
You want us to spend our 8 minutes all at once?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And then I'll have Mrs. Diagresta help us keep track of time. Please give them 1 minute before the 8 minutes. And then just to be Because each group, both groups have 1 hour, and we want to be fair to both groups. Let's try to, if your time's up, it's up, and we're going to move on, okay?
No problem. Ready? All right, thank you. Well, thank you for the presentation, and I appreciate the packet that you gave us ahead of time. I went through it very carefully. I have a couple of questions because of that packet. First one, how will you help us minimize our expenses as we go through this?
Well, in truth, the pricing of the original search, we recognize is lower than some other firms would offer you. That, we believe, where our price point is already set at a point where it can save districts' expenses. Additionally, there are opportunities for, Dr. Vogel talked about community input, and one expense on community input would be travel of us coming and facilitating those meetings. It's also a benefit on the backside. But there are ways to get community input that don't require such expenses. There are electronic means, there are some, in fact, I'm looking at a platform right now that kind of has a Facebook Live community input opportunity where you'd have one face-to-face, but it would be aired live in a number of different places. So we explore opportunities all the time. We try to minimize our travel to the district. We'll agree with the board what meetings are important for us to be at, where you want us, when you want us, so we don't just show up without asking in advance. We also make sure that, for example, these gentlemen won't need overnight accommodations in hotels. And I think most of you know I have family in St. Lucie, and I also actually have a teacher in Indian River who's a dear friend of mine who's opened her home to me. So we wouldn't have to do some hotel rooms. With regard to bringing in candidates, we try to bring all of the activities in within sort of a 2-day period so that you don't have to replicate costs for, let's say you're doing an evening meet and greet, you wouldn't have to repeat those costs over and over, different weeks, if you will, or different nights, if you will. We try to do it all at once. Gentlemen, anything that I have forgotten?
I think that's it.
That, it really is one of our priorities, and I think you can talk to any of the references that we've given you, and they would let you know that we are not known for running up costs in any way. That's just not what we do.
Okay. And so is part of the cost then included with, you mentioned a couple times that you support after the superintendent's been placed? So is that included in the fees?
The first workshop certainly, which is what we would call your protocols workshop, where we would get the board and the superintendent together to kind of discuss communication expectations, set some protocols, that's always included, yes ma'am. If there's additional training, I have to pay my facilitators to come. So depending on what specialized needs you have, within the Superintendent's Association, they have other trainings that come with membership, I should say,
Correct.
of FADS.
Right, and there isn't any cost, just, for example, the finance workshop that we did with the board, that was at no cost, and we can provide that training and mentoring at no cost with that.
Okay. And do you help with the negotiation of the final contract?
We do, and that's part of our package. It does not cost any more money.
Yeah, that's included.
That's
And
included in that,
and
too.
That's what I thought.
yeah,
Okay.
and we really, because we've participated with some of the most recent hires in Florida, we know what the contracts are. We have copies of them. We know what the language, the kind of going language is. Some of it, some boards choose to put language in that we don't necessarily recommend, but we'll give you our best recommendations for sure.
Okay. And then what exactly do all the fees entail that we're looking at?
I'm sorry.
I mean, I looked at all the fees and it said up to 25,000. So what exactly,
Say up to 25?
pretty sure in your
It's a flat rate of 25,000.
Okay.
That's why I'm asking
All right.
on
So
that.
flat
think-
rate include, but that doesn't include advertising costs? correct.
That is correct.
Okay.
Advertising is separate because there are some districts who are really committed. They want to advertise in the Wall Street Journal for 4 weeks. We can't include that within our fee, which includes the consulting and the ability to be available and the ability to attend your meetings and give the guidance that we need to give when we don't know where you want to advertise or for how long. So the advertising costs are different from that. Where there are a number of advertising, this goes back to how do we save money. There are a number of places that are free or minimal in advertising costs, which aspiring superintendents typically know about and typically go to. We certainly hit all of those. And with the National School Boards Association, the affiliation of superintendent searchers, we also distribute within each state through those sorts of mechanisms. But should a board decide they want to advertise in another more costly publication, that's where those costs come into play. But typically, advertising costs have been less than $2,000, even less than $1,000. But we have to keep that separate in case somebody decides, because we have had people who wanted much more costly
Oh,
publications.
I see that, I see that.
One thing that is included, I just want to emphasize, if we go and do community forums throughout the community, that's all included in that flat fee,
Okay, we just pay for your travel then?
travel down.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. All right. How are your surveys conducted, and what type of questions do you ask?
That's a great question, because we were just working with Volusia County on their survey, and we actually, the kind of questions we ask are unique to what questions do you want asked as a board. In Volusia, they wanted we tailored the categories of questions to match their strategic goals. And originally, we proposed that there would be for each strategic goal sort of, I think it was 5 or 6 questions within it. They actually said, no, we really don't want them to answer 5 or 6 questions. We want to know what they think is the single most important of those 5 or 6 within that category. So then we changed it out to say, which of the following statements within this category is most important to you for the next superintendent? And so based on your input, we designed the questions. We designed it specifically for them, for their strategic plan. For other districts, we've done it just in general with questions having to do with some of the categories that you all ask questions about, even in your interim superintendent interviews, because those are really the key elements of the function of a superintendent, so we try to put some questions there. But we tailor that to a district, and then when you ask how do we do it, we work with your IT department. Some IT departments prefer a SurveyMonkey, some IT departments prefer a Survey Gizmo, some IT departments have their own mechanism. So we work with your staff to do what your staff is comfortable with and what's easy through your website portal. We ask.
1 minute.
Thank you. We ask that each of your districts advertise that in their newsletters. We would like to have it advertised in the newspaper and certainly on your website, so it would be an electronic format.
Okay, great. And in a couple seconds, what recommendations do you have in forming a citizens committee, if we do so?
I'll let you,
We do that.
less than a minute.
Okay. A citizens committee, normally, there's 2 ways. Board members would select a certain number of individuals. Normally, we recommend about 20 people on the committee. And some boards will, for example, each board member will select 3, and then you might identify 5 constituent groups. There might be a Chamber of Commerce, for example, that you'd say you want a representative from the Chamber of Commerce. You might want one on for a different, from the advisory committee or PTA. So that's the way we recommend doing the citizens committee. And then we usually have about 20 to 25 members on the committee.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you for being here today. I appreciate all of your wealth of experience and the packet that you put together. Is the process, you all did our interim superintendent search, and is the process for seeking a superintendent similar to the interim superintendent search in terms of that chart that you gave us and kind of sifting through each of those based on the priorities that are in that chart?
When you
Is
say the
that-
chart, were you talking about the chart that you used to kind of look at the resume packages from each candidate?
Yes.
Okay. Yes,
Is that similar to what we're looking for with regard to superintendent?
It is if that's what you're telling us you're looking for.
Gotcha, okay.
But we adapt it based on district needs. That's kind of our standard chart.
Yeah.
What we've done in different districts is we've created a chart unique to the priorities that they're looking for. So
Okay.
the same things that Bill mentioned with regard to the finance piece that you guys mentioned as a priority and the DSEG order, we would then have you sort of vet the candidates with some of those categories in your matrix, if you will.
So for me, during that, the interim superintendent search, what was helpful for me was the opportunity at some point to call the candidates that I kind of thought might be important, or the ones that I thought I would want to recommend to my fellow board members to invite in for the final interview. There was a very short window that we were able to call, if you remember that.
Yes.
And when I called the candidates that I selected on my own, they were very clear that it was not an interview, that it was just an informal discussion, sort of a chat. And as an administrator, a former administrator, I understand the importance of kind of reaching out to someone on, other than that formal interview. For a position such as superintendent, I think it's incredibly important. Will we have an opportunity to do that at some point during this superintendent search? If so, is that part of a meet and greet? What is a meet and greet? Can you kind of put all those pieces together for me?
There are some substantive differences between an interim search and a permanent superintendent search, beginning with what we call our pre-search interview. We like to sit down with the board and the exiting superintendent and really go through all sorts of categories. What's the relationship like with the community, with the legislature, with your local municipalities, so that we get a full and complete picture of the district, the community, and the areas that may need some attention and focus. We work out a timeline, actually, that's one of the things Mr. Reichert referenced. We work out a timeline in conjunction with the board, and we set up, so for example, the collection of resumes, the advertisement, you guys had a very short window for your interim. Normally, we would recommend 4 to 6 weeks on that. But depending on your needs, that could change. So once that window ends, or actually before it even ends, early in the process, we sit down and discuss with you, what do you want those next steps to look like? How much time do you want in between this step and that step? Do you want to have 2 weeks to review the applications, or do you want a community advisory committee to sort of sift through and only have you look at those? As you all know better than anyone, there are applications that will come in that do not meet your expectations and criteria. So do you want sort of a filtering process before then? And then there's also, we try to build in time for research on the candidates. We know very well that you all are going to Google every candidate you get, and that you need some time to do that. But the other big difference between hiring an interim and hiring a permanent superintendent is the way that we structure the interviews, and the way that we recommend is that you do the group interview, similar to what you did with your interim, but each one of you also has a one-on-one interview.
Okay.
And so you would have an hour, typically, depending on the number of candidates and how many days we have, an hour, minimally 45 minutes, one-on-one, you in a room with each of the candidates. If you have 5 candidates, it's going to be a long day, but you're going to have 5 interviews, 1 hour each between you and the candidate. So it gives you that one-on-one time. And that, we believe, is important because board members have to know that they can communicate with the candidate. They have to kind of get a feel for how that relationship's going to work. There's something about looking people in the eyes that matters. But additionally, another sort of step along the way is a semifinalists vetting. So you may have 10 candidates that you guys want to continue to consider, and how do you get that 10 down to the 5 you want to bring in for interviews, or the 3? One of the things that we recommend is some written responses to some questions that you all determine are the most high priority questions that you would like to have answered. Another option that we're looking at instituting that we haven't done quite yet, but Volusia was very excited about it, was having some video responses to questions. Then you get a feel for the person in video and how they speak, what their cadence is, what their confidence level is, and that may also help to do some vetting. So there's some additional steps different from an interim search that we institute in a permanent search. Gentlemen, anything to add?
I think just the question maybe about the community reception. As Andrea mentioned, we try to have 2 days to kind of do the interview process on site, which would include your board as the body interviewing the candidates, some maybe school community tours for the candidates while others are being interviewed, and then the Friday is kind of your one-on-one. And that Thursday evening, prior to your Friday one-on-one interviews, we would have kind of a meet and greet for the community. It would be at a location that, Indian River would say, this is a good centralized location. Is it a high school? Is it a community center? And your finalists, your 3 to 4 finalists are at that event, and your community has a chance to come in and simply meet and talk with those candidates. The candidates would have 2 to 3 minutes just to introduce himself or herself, maybe a few statements about why they feel they would be the next great superintendent in Indian River, and then it's just kind of a social mingling. We're there to kind of make sure certain members of the public don't take all the time of one candidate, and we move those folks around. At the end of that, as the community exits, there will be a little half sheet of 4x8 card that simply the community can jot down their thoughts about each candidate. We compile those that night and then get them to the board members the next morning, and you kind of get a feel for what the community thought as they met the candidates. But that kind of specifically addresses your question about a community reception for the finalists.
I appreciate that. At some point, I know my time is going to run out. I don't know if we're going to be able to circle around, but at some point, I would like, maybe if another board member has this question, a little bit more understanding on what a citizens committee looks like, what the function of the citizens committee, their recommendation, or the advisory committee, if there is one, if they have a recommendation at the end of the day, who has the final word?
It's
Do
an
we
important
accept-
issue.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But thank you, because I know I don't want to rush that answer at this point.
Dr. Schiff?
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, on the Citizens Committee, I'm not going to ask that now, but I noticed that when you asked that question, my mind is already running through who do I want on that committee. I want to ask you, with limited time, a few sort of pointed, direct questions, and get, pointed, direct answers, if I could.
Sure.
Past searches that you've done, can you tell me within a couple $1,000s, what cost those have run? I know you have a $25,000 base, what's been the overage, so what can we assume?
I would say the most expensive came in, I think, at 32.
And the least expensive came in about?
27.
Okay. Follow-up to that, not quite the same, but tell me if you could quickly, what was your most successful search and why? What was your least successful search and why?
Oh, gosh.
I know, hard to do in 2 minutes.
The most successful.
Every search is different. I'm not going to say one's more
Right.
successful or less successful. I'll tell you,
Let me change the word successful to most challenging, least challenging.
We had one search interrupted by hurricane
yeah,
in St. Johns County, and we were
Good challenge.
that was a little
That's
bit of a
true.
challenge right there.
their district office was flooded. They had to
Flooded.
move to a different site. We actually, it was the weekend that the candidates were coming in for the interviews, that all the hotels were closed because the hurricane was coming. That was a challenge.
But no problem at all. We pulled it together and it went real
Speaking
smooth.
less of natural disasters, but more the things that are under our
It could be
control.
considered a national disaster. I don't know.
I'll tell you, St. John's, we'll go back to St. John's. St. John's was a bit of a challenge for us because at the very beginning, one board member said that the only person he would ever consider to be the superintendent was an internal candidate. And when a board member goes on record doing that, it really, we have to work very hard to get people to apply because they already feel like there's not a open window. That was a challenge. I will say, let's see, least challenging would be Polk, because at the first meeting when we went there, they said, you know what, we've changed our mind, we're gonna hire our interim, and thank you for, the work that you've done. So that would have been the least challenging.
Okay, thank you. You spoke a little bit, Dr. Vogel, from your previous experience, knowing that what some of our priorities in this district. Can you speak a little bit to what you think we are looking for in this district and how you will help us find that person?
Myself?
Anybody?
Well, I would actually point to Dr. Moxley to answer that question, because when we came and we heard what you were looking for in an interim, it became sort of clear to me that she might be the right person for you, and so really understanding your needs and knowing somebody that can meet them, because we've worked with them and we know how they can maneuver. I knew Dr. Moxley had a clear-headedness about her and sort of a calmness about her that I thought could really benefit this district. I knew that Janelle also had those same qualities. So it was really important to us to bring people to you that we really thought could meet your needs. Now, if you decided that they weren't the right people, that's fine, but we wanted to at least have people at the table that we thought could best meet your needs as we understood them. That's why it's really important that we understand your needs.
Yeah, and I think that the board did an excellent job when we talked about the characteristics and experience that you wanted when you were looking for the interim. Proven builder of relationships. You talked about overseeing the district budget and building that. Academically, ability to instill trust internally and externally, exhibits passion for issues and caring for employees. I mean, I think this was very helpful to us, and this is the type of information that we would do a pre-search and we would review all this. But, and then that really helps us. And when candidates, and we're vetting candidates, and if you have a committee or vetting candidates on the board, this is what we look to. When people look online, and they might, a candidate looks at what you're interested in, they'll look at these characteristics.
Yes, and referencing to how that worked in our very short timeline interim search, you know, all of that did indeed happen, and we wound up with someone who's been great for our district. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So big kudos on that. How will you help us, if we decide this is a route we want to go, how would you help us identify what might be considered non-traditional candidates for this district, who might not come up through the more traditional channels or might not be on a more traditional radar?
Well, the first thing we do when we talk about qualifications is we really have a conversation with the board about, is it important to this board and this community that the superintendent have been a principal or been a teacher or been in education? That's the first vetting right there. And if the board gives us an idea that, you know what, no, we could look at a different sort of candidate, and we've had districts who recognize that maybe military service might prepare someone that could serve as a superintendent, or maybe business experience could serve instead of education and serving as an expert. So first we talk with the board through it, kind of understand what the community is looking for, to truly, to open up to see how broad the, quote, non-traditional candidate might be. Some people might consider a non-traditional candidate anything other than a male in being a superintendent. And so we need to know how far you guys are really pushing and willing, because what we don't want to do is waste people's time either. We don't want to waste your time, and we don't want to waste the candidate's time. If you all believe, and if your community believes it has to be someone with principal experience and somebody, a business person, they're not really going to want to come and expose themselves to these sort of transparency and inspection that's going to come with being a superintendent if they don't feel like they have a real chance. So we need to know what your parameters you have. We work very closely with some national associations that develop superintendents in non-traditional ways. Like, Bill, you have a
Yeah, Broad Foundation, and they do that, and other groups like that. What we would want to do is make sure when we set the required qualifications that we don't exclude a non-traditional candidate. If the board tells us that, we'll do that.
There's a number of associations. There's an association of Hispanic administrators, association of Black administrators. You know, there's all sorts of associations with whom we work to attract, if that's what you're considering as a non-traditional, we can do it that way, but we also work with some business groups, and depending on what you think is non-traditional.
In our interim search, we got a lot of candidates who were not qualified for the job. We went through all of those. In the process for the permanent, will you siphon those out, or will you leave that to the board to go through what I anticipate will be probably more candidates than we had for our interim search?
I recognize we probably have 20 seconds, but that's actually one of the roles that your community advisory committee serves in many districts. They vet that level and say, maybe we have 50 applicants, but here are the 12 that we think you ought to continue to consider. We are very clear that the board makes the decision of who they're going to hire, and so the community advises the board, but doesn't make a decision for the board.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Justice?
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming today. We appreciate your support and helping us with an interim search. Our first relationship with you has been truly as a professional development organization. We've worked with you. I've attended new board member training as well as other trainings, and all of our board attended a training that you had where you bring together all of the board members across the state that would like to attend. You don't have to be a member to attend. You can just come. So we are new members of your professional development organization, and my understanding is that that is really the larger arm of your organization, but you do serve as a search firm as well. So some of the questions that I'm going to ask today are going to be around that. I would like to be clear and say that in looking for someone for this position, I truly believe this is the most important decision that we'll make as a school board, and it's going to be really the legacy that we leave in this district for the time that we serve on this board. I'm looking for someone who wants an opportunity, not a job. And I'm not looking for someone who's currently unemployed. That is my personal thought process here. I'd like someone with vision and someone with a track record of success. And so when I speak to you about working with other districts, and when I look at what's on your plate right now, you've mentioned that you'll be working with 3 districts, Volusia, Escambia, and Martin County, in their search. There are 3 of you. There are 3 districts you'll be working with. If you worked with us, we would be your 4th. Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy as far as recruiting within Florida and current serving superintendents?
Certainly. I will tell you that is an ongoing effort that I know the 3 of us and other members of the FSBA staff do every single time we're in a district. We look at every touch point with administrative staff in a district as an opportunity to help them develop into stronger and better leaders that will eventually be superintendents. So we, for example, attend some of the School Administrators Association functions so that we can meet these people. I can ask them, hey, are you interested in being a superintendent someday? And they say yes, and I say, tell me what's on your resume. They'll say finance, I'm in the finance department. I say, great, what I want you to do is get some experience in HR, get some experience in curriculum. I don't care what it is, you volunteer for this, volunteer for that. We recommend and try to help build those people. And in doing so, that is our recruiting pool. We get communication with people all the time, every day practically. Can you look at my resume? Can you recommend professional development this summer? Can you, hey, I'm gonna be in Tallahassee. Can I come by and talk to you? Can we brainstorm about some other opportunities I can expose myself to that would make myself a better candidate? So for us, recruiting is not just when we have an active search. Recruiting for us is having a pool always available and ready to go when we need them to launch.
I think that's a wonderful point, and I think it, again, highlights your commitment to professional development and building stronger leaders throughout the district, throughout the state, I'm sorry. It is as much a strength, in my opinion, as a weakness for you in working with you as an organization, just to be clear. If we had an interest in a superintendent that's currently serving somewhere else, would you go and recruit that superintendent for us?
That's an interesting question that you ask. First off, we never discourage anyone from applying if they have interest. However, I will tell you straight to your face, we do not poach sitting superintendents from other member districts in our association. So for example, if Dr. Moxley was your permanent superintendent, you all would not want me to come in here and try to recruit her out to go to another district, even if she might be a great fit, because she is your superintendent, you all are our members. We don't do that.
And so my opinion on that would be, and I'll just share that with my fellow board members, while I totally respect and agree with the fact that I wouldn't want anyone to come in and recruit away our superintendent, it will be my opinion that I want to work with a search firm or a recruiting firm that is aggressive enough to be able to do that. If there is someone that's qualified, or there is someone that there may even be a conflict, right? They may be applying in other districts that you're working with currently. My hope will be that we will work with a recruiting firm that will fight for us. We will be priority number 1, and there won't be any other conflicts. And that's a concern, and if you'd like to speak to that for the rest of the time, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah. Yes, I'd like to say this. We have superintendents, active superintendents that are contacting us, and that's a different story. And we are out there, and I just finished a training program, leading a training program for FADS, and worked with 19 superintendents that finished. So we know the superintendents, and we have had some contact us, and that's a different story. It's a subtle point, but it's different. So we know who is out there. In my past work, working with in superintendent searches, we have had current superintendents hired in, a current elected superintendent hired in an appointed superintendent district. So we know who is available, who might want to leave. So we can find the perfect fit for this district. Another thing you brought up, Ms. Justice, is that the timeline fits perfect, as John said, because of the two of the districts we're working with that's not, they don't need a superintendent till November 2020, where your timeline would fit perfect. So we don't think that's a negative feeling.
I'm sorry, do I still have time left? Then I'll ask you this. If you have, I think we have Volusia with a start date of January 1. I would imagine that our timeline is fairly similar. Dr. Moxley's made a commitment, but, you know, it's my understanding that she's made a commitment as an interim and won't be continuing on past her contract time or as a superintendent to be hired. That's my understanding as of this moment, and perhaps that changes, I don't know. But if you had a superintendent, if you had someone that was interested in both positions, can you say that you'll fight for us to get it versus the other client?
If that's the best fit for you.
Well, but what if we feel it's the best fit for us?
That's what I'm saying. If you all are telling me, hey, this is somebody we're really interested in,
And if the other district is saying it's the person they're really interested in too?
you know, I'm going to say, one of the things, we had a very similar
Similar, right.
situation between Sarasota and St. Johns County. They had
Right.
similar sort of academic achievement, and there were some people who applied in both. One of the things that we recommended to both districts is look at the other district's schedule, and if you want first pick, because it's not just about fighting for you to get the person, it's about getting that person to choose you.
Right.
Because they have a choice in the matter as well. And so what we want to do is posture you in the best possible way to appeal to that person.
right.
But the other thing that Sarasota took us up on is Sarasota decided to change the date of their selection meeting to be before St. John's, which they both had the opportunity to do. St. John's kept with their original schedule. Sarasota went first because they wanted first choice.
And it's just added another layer of complexity to the
Correct.
search.
Yeah.
That, you know,
Yeah.
so it's something to be considered. It's just.
Absolutely, I fully understand.
Thank you, Mrs. Sawyer.
Thank you. Okay, so Mrs. Justice did touch on one of my points I wanted to ask to have you clarify. So you are currently working with Volusia. I know that Flagler is in the midst or getting ready to start a search. What other school districts do you know of in the next 6 months that are going to launch a search that might not be clients of yours?
I'm going to go out 18 months rather
Okay.
than just 6, because we know there are some on the horizon with a start date of either June 2020 or November 2020. There are 3 in November of 2020, which are the 3 that are changing from elected to appointed. So that's Escambia, Marion, and Martin. All right, those are the 3 in November of 2020. In June of 2020, we know that Flagler has indicated, they're not working with us at this point. We haven't communicated with them on that. But that's what we've read, and that's what the chairman has told me. We also know that Monroe has a June 2020 retirement date, which is the Keys. And we also know that Hillsborough has a June 2020 retirement date. Now, Hillsborough, we did not submit an RFP to Hillsborough. They're working with Array Associates right now,
Okay.
and that's a June 2020 start date. And Marion is also working with Ray and Associates. Yeah, they're working with Ray and Associates, yeah, because they did a piggyback contract in Hillsborough. So those are the ones that we know separate and apart from you and Volusia right now.
Okay, so it seems like with us getting started now versus waiting until the first of the year, it seems like we're going to put ourselves in a good position to have some of the top picks because we are coming in
If you guys
early.
could come in before June, you'll have better, yes, ma'am. You'll have better
So
opportunity.
what, when we look at a timeline, and I know every district's different, and it's really, you know, based on what the board wants, but in my research, it seems like this, from the start date till the end date, it seems like 6 months is a good it could give or take 4, 5 months, but it seems like 6 months is a good search. Is that?
That's very
your-
fair.
Yes.
Okay. And then if we look at today, after we're finished with the presentations, and I'm just trying to look at what our timeline would be if, and this is just my personal question here, is if you were to get, or whatever firm that we decide, would we have them get started in September, and then that would be September?
What we would
October,
look at
November,
is we would
December.
ask, what's the soonest possible date we can come and have this pre-search conversation and look at timeline priorities? Because we have to start with a start date of the new superintendent and work backwards from there. So we look at, based on what she's willing to do and what timelines you all have locked in, what can be the start date? Then once we have the start date, we go, okay, moving back, we need time to build in for negotiations, time to build in for interviews, time to build in for collecting resumes. We want to advertise for 4 or 6 weeks. We really work backwards for every single activity to make sure that we have the timeframes you're looking at. And based on the time you're looking at, maybe you can't advertise for 6 or 8 weeks, like some districts who are hiring in November will have every opportunity. They could advertise for 90 days if they wanted to. You may not have that ability. That doesn't mean you're not going to get good candidates. It just means you're not going to be advertising as long as some of them. So we work backwards from that to come up with, and in some cases, depending on the district, it could be an aggressive, like Volusia right now, they kind of have an aggressive schedule because they wanted a June 1 start date and the holidays are in there. I'm sorry, January, thank you. And the holidays are in there, so they knew they needed to hire before Thanksgiving, which meant boom, 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 boom. So they're moving at a pretty good pace, but that also requires commitment on the board. We look at, when we're proposing a timeline for you, we look at the schedule the board already has advertised. So we look at meetings and workshops that are already on your calendar. How can we maximize those dates and events, backing in everything that needs to happen? And then if we have to add, for example, you may decide you want community input sessions, which would be sort of focus groups. Maybe you do them 3 throughout the county, 1 at this school, 1 at this school, 1 at this school. We try to build those in when we can, but those might be additional dates that aren't already on the board or district calendar. Or we may find that there are open houses in the fall that they could nicely dovetail with. So we really try to look at what you already have, what can fit in with what you have, minimizing the additional meetings you'll have to put in there. And John, you may have an opinion on that as well, because he's the one that really deals with all those logistics.
Well, really, the smaller the window is for your beginning and ending search, then the greater possibilities you may have to add an additional 2 to 3 meetings. But the longer the window, then certainly we can put more into your established meetings, or we add something into a workshop you already might have. But, 4 to 6 months is really a very nice period to begin in.
Okay, so.
And Ms. Messina is right, that it's like any project you attempt, what is your final date you want a result, you want the product, we want a start date, and we just start backing up. And again, the number of community forums you have, 4 compared to 2, may extend it a little bit, but 6 months is a good window.
Okay, I have a couple of questions, but, so it seems if we do decide to hire the firm today and through action, starting in September, going 6 months to February, if we were to find someone and offer them the position in February, technically, it takes a few weeks for them to negotiate their contract, correct? So it might be the end of February, because what I'm looking at, and I have to be mindful, is that with a new superintendent coming in, is having them be a part of the planning and the budget process going into the next year. So what type of transition period is a good period for Dr. Moxley to set with the new incoming superintendent? Because prior, it was a couple of days, but what is a good time for the new superintendent to set with the outgoing? Is it a week, 2 weeks?
Well, in some cases, you have to remember, the people that you're hopefully attracting are people who are very prominent in their current role and probably have a lot of projects that are ongoing. So they're very likely going to need some time, 2 weeks, 30 days, whatever, to close up their projects wherever they currently are. Sometimes during those close-up time periods, if you can kind of get a contract together, they may be able to come to your district for 2 days this week and 2 days, 2 weeks later, just to kind of get in and get a little feel, which would be sort of the overlap. John, you typically would work through that.
Yes, we would work through that. 30 days is normally a time that seems to work well in the past in our experience.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would depend, I think it would depend on the qualifications of the candidate, but I know that Dr. Moxley, when we interviewed, had said that she would work with anyone coming in
Sure.
to help to develop a transition plan, so I feel good about that in general, right?
Okay. So I did say I'd give you 3 minutes to wrap up, but, or I'm sorry, 7, but we actually have 2 minutes, so I'm going to allow you just to finish your thoughts here. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll quickly talk about the community input and the citizens advisory, because many of you had that question. We look at these as two different things. Community input is gathering information from the community. In general, what qualifications, what are you looking for in a superintendent? Those could be focus groups, those could be electronic surveys, those could be any number of ways we can talk about that. Community Advisory Committee is a little bit different. This is a smaller, more selective group. We can make it as prescriptive as you like, or maybe as loose as you'd like, but typically they would serve the function of, in some way, vetting all of the applications. Not that you all couldn't pull out from what they said weren't necessarily qualified, but that they would come together and look at all those resumes and really wean out the ones that aren't at all qualified. The ones that meet your expectations, they would come before you and say, here are the ones, here's what we think you ought to continue to consider. And then the board has that, plus any others if they wanted to pull up. But it's a way to involve your community in a more formal way through an advisory committee, which is different than input from the community.
How do you facilitate that advisory committee?
Some districts want very prescriptive things. St. John's was one. They created rules and guidelines and practices, and we're going to meet twice, and they're going to come in. So we were there at every meeting. We facilitated all of those meetings. In Sarasota, for example, they wanted their community foundation to be the facilitators for that. We were there with them. We worked with the community foundation to create the agendas. What would we expect? We make sure that the conversation within those community advisory committees stays where it's supposed to be and reminds all community members that it's not their decision. They are making a recommendation.
You said community foundation, you mean their Ed Foundation?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
We have a different relationship with our Ed
This
Foundation.
is their wrap-up.
Right.
Some way we could, let you have any final comments that you want to have and wrap up?
I guess our comment would be that we really care about the future of your district in ways that you probably don't even know, because we care about the future of all districts, but we really recognize that you all are at a juncture here where, as Mr. Vogel noted, we really want to continue to help see your academic improvement increase, and we believe that with the board and the superintendent and a positive and successful working relationship that can happen. You guys have a great foundation here. We would like to help contribute to building it with and through you for your community.
Well, thank you. We
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank
you
you so
coming in
much.
today.
Thank you.
Look forward to hearing from you
Thank you.
Thank you.
on this or any other topic.
While we transition with the next group, let's take a recess for 7 minutes, and we'll come back at, 6 minutes. We'll come back at 2:10, okay? We're going to call this meeting back to order. It is 2:12 on August 6th. We are conducting a special meeting today, and part of the meeting today, we are hearing presentations because we are interviewing for the superintendent recruitment firm that we're going to look at helping us through this process and finding our next superintendent. The way that we would like to we'd like to offer you 1 hour like we did the last firm. We had said 40 minutes each, and then 20 minutes questions, but they did wrap up with their presentation early, and then as soon as you're finished with your presentation, we'll just divide that time and we'll jump into questions from each of the board members. Did you have anything, Dr. Moxley?
No, just welcome to Dr. Adams and Dr. Brown. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And thank you for being here.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to present. We know that there are a lot of search firms around the country, and we certainly welcome the opportunity. We're going to give you, begin by saying, first of all, and we don't want to tamper with your protocols at all, but if there are questions that should come up, there's no such thing as interrupting us. We don't mind handling them as they come up, or we'll handle them all however you want to do it or whatever your protocol is. By way of background, HYA has been around for about 35 years. They're based in Schaumburg, Illinois, although we have associates all over the country. I am a Florida resident. I've been a resident of Naples, Florida for 10 years, although I do still maintain a Jersey Shore property where it gets kind of hot in Naples in the summer, and so we do leave on occasion. We've done, as a company over the last 35 years, some 1,400 searches, and there's a couple of statistics that we think are very important with that as we talk about the company. We did a study of all the placements we were involved in from 2000 to 2016 and found at that time 80% of all of the searches we had done for superintendents, the superintendents were either still on the job or they retired from the position. I think that's important, as well as looking overall at superintendent tenure and so forth. And one of the things you'll get with Dr. Brown and myself, each of us were superintendents and only in one district each, and we have 45 years of experience in the superintendency as a result of that. We understand, and that gives us an understanding of governance and the importance of the relationship between the role of the governing body, the role of the chief education officer or superintendent. The HYA, in terms of Florida, I personally did the last time Broward was done. I know there's some issues now there, but that was some 7 years ago. Did Collier County, and Camilla Patton is still in Collier County. And recently we did Duval County when I was president for the East Coast of HYA. And that particular one, and it's interesting when you look at a national search. In Broward, Bob Runcie came from Chicago. In Collier, Camilla Patton came from Miami-Dade. In Duval, the superintendent there came from Manatee County. So there certainly is the knowledge of Florida, the Florida Sunshine Laws, and all of those things that we'll get into when we talk about that phase of it. What we'd like to do is just take a brief pause. Monica is going to tell you something about her background, then I'll talk about mine as well, because we'll be the face of HYA. We have a team of some 100 associates across the country. We have an office in Schaumburg, but we're the face that would work with the board.
Hi, my name is Monica Brown, and I'm very glad that you invited us here today. Thank you again for having us. I've had the pleasure of being the superintendent of schools for Upper Saddle River for over 9 years when I retired. when I retired, in 2017. I now am teaching at 2 colleges and helping with superintendent searches. I've mentored superintendents and principals around New Jersey and Delaware, and I'm very excited to be a part of working with a team at HYA because, as Bill was saying, it's not only, you don't just work with us, but we do have a great support staff behind us, people who have worked on searches all over the country, who we can ask for advice, discuss candidates, and really utilize the services of a greater organization. So that is why I chose to be an associate with HYA and why it's been great to work here so far.
Bill Adams, as I've already mentioned, 36 years actually as superintendent in the same district. And during that period of time, you learn a lot about governance and people and teams and having the right team. And I think one of the things that got me about 12 years ago into the search process and the search business was the fact that we had, off of my team over those years, our team, 9 superintendents come off of that team, 8 principals, an assistant commissioner, and 2 college presidents. So got to also then see the leadership side of how important that is. Probably, though, most proud of a son who was a superintendent of schools in Haddon Heights, New Jersey today, and another son who is the director of special services in Woodbury, New Jersey. So it's an education thing, but leadership is so important, and fit becomes so important, the right fit. You know, we often kid, now you're a 5-person board, and we often kid about some of the 7 and 9, and I just finished Beaufort County, South Carolina, where they had 11 members on the board. And in fact, we took a Floridian there, Dr. Frank Rodriguez, the regional superintendent for Palm Beach County, got that job. And maybe just to deviate a little bit, the 2 finalists there, the board had a hard time deciding between the 2, and the person that didn't get the job was hired a week later by Rochester, New York, as their superintendent. So the talent pool, we like to say that we're a national firm with a local reach and a local participation. So with that, that's Bill Adams. We've done a lot of searches. I, for 3 years, was the president for the East Coast, and I did formerly work for another national firm that I did see put a proposal in, but I don't think they were selected, and that was some time ago. With that, we'd like to talk about our process. And you have a proposal in front of you, and then you also have in front of you what we call our signature search process that we obviously customize for each district that we go into. An interesting fact is you look at our cover information. We've done searches in districts as small as 100 students, not a school building, but as small as 100 students, and Los Angeles, which I believe is somewhere around 646,000. Broward, I think, was still up around 256 to whatever. So we adapt the search to the district we're working in because fit is so important. Monica, do you want to go into the engage phase? And if you follow along in your proposal, I believe it's the 3rd page there.
Absolutely. One of the most important parts of our process is engaging the board members, obviously, but also to work with you to engage your community, your staff, your stakeholder groups, in helping you to create a leadership profile. This profile is what we use to recruit and discuss the job with potential candidates. And we think it's a great opportunity for you as a Board of Education to bring in your stakeholders as part of the process, although retaining the right to obviously make the decision on candidates yourself, because that's an important decision that the board makes. But through our process of engagement, we bring together, at our planning meeting, you decide who you'd like to engage. And we bring together groups, do interviews, and put together a leadership profile from that. And as I was reading your strategic plan, I think that measurable data to demonstrate the board's commitment to the culture and climate, a high-quality workforce, communication engagement, and even your strategic partnerships. We collect data not only in an online survey, but also during these focus groups and interviews. We put that together in a leadership profile, and the data that we collect, I believe, as I read some of your strategic plan updates over the years, could be data that you used in order to show engagement with the community, especially in this very important process. In addition to that, in these meetings, we typically find themes. In our company, I do a lot of the focus groups. I've been asked to go to many places and do focus groups. And I love talking to community members because every community is different and everyone has different priorities that they'd like to see in a new school leader. And sometimes they have agendas, and sometimes they're hurt over certain issues. And this gives people in your community, your stakeholders, a chance to discuss those issues, and they are a public forum. I know in Florida with your sunshine laws, they would be public forums. But what I do is collect the themes and present them back to you as part of the leadership profile. Just a little bit about me. My research for my dissertation was done in school climate studies, and so I pay very close attention to the comments and then the survey data in order to try to give you a real feeling of what your community, what your staff, even what your fellow board members think are very important qualities or issues that are facing the district that the new superintendent will have to handle. So that's a very important part of our process. We engage, again, groups at your discretion. You, if you sign a contract with us, get 4 consultant days where we'll be here to meet with groups and to collect that data. And of course, the online survey that we have, I know you read about it in our proposal, but the great thing about our online survey is it is data that's normed nationally, so you can use the information that you gain when you're creating your own reports about your district, especially with your strategic plan.
Let me jump in there. On the survey itself, on the folder we handed out, on the left side is a copy of the survey we use. I think one of the things that is important, we can disaggregate the data into at least 6 groups. The first part of the survey, and this was changed 2.5 years ago, as Monica said, it's research-based, but the first part of this really is a community input, community assessment of the school district. It really gives you a mini SWOT analysis of surveying your community. That mini SWOT analysis of strengths, weaknesses, or some like to say challenges, threats, and opportunities, it comes out in the first part of that. The second part is actually normed to ISLIC standards for leadership. So you'll get as part of that whole process to develop a leadership profile, a complete report that looks like the report behind the one that breaks down what your various constituents saw and looked at. That's important as you begin the process. Generally, we like to, within 2 weeks of being appointed, or whatever the board schedule is, we like to schedule a planning meeting with the board as part of the engagement process. What happens at the planning meeting? Well, number one, we all get our calendars out, and we try to commit. You're busy people, we're busy as well. We try to commit to dates throughout. And what's the very first thing we do? Well, when do you want the successor superintendent to start? Because at least 90 days before that, and we know that's a little sore point with some of you, that at least 90 days prior to that, we like to have the person announced, finished, and a contract signed. So that calendar becomes very important. What else happens at that first meeting? Well, that's when we talk about the stakeholders. We will set up at the planning meeting and around the planning meeting the interviews of each of the board members. We like to do at least a half-hour to 45-minute one-on-one interview with each board member. Why? Well, collectively, you derive your statutory authority as a body, as a board. But we like to know your individual expectations, your individual biases, and we all have them. And that helps us as we bring the materials together as we prepare that profile, which is based, as Monica said, from the focus groups. And we can, one of the things you might want to do, for instance, with the two high schools, since your elementary and your middle schools feed into those schools, what you may want to consider, for instance, is a community meeting at each high school on different nights, so that if someone, even though geographically, when you talk about a county this large, of what, 564 square miles, that you may want to make it accessible for people. Of course, the ones that can't get there, the survey. Survey, by the way, we provide in both English and Spanish. You can get additional languages, but there is a fee for each additional language. So that's the survey piece and some of what happens at that planning meeting. At the planning meeting, we try to get away from giving you from that point on a lot of paper, unless you're more comfortable with paper, and then we say to the district, here's the electronic version, you kill the trees. What we do at that point is establish a portal for the board. And the board has a closed portal for the board, and all of the documents are put on that portal so that you have access to it. Now, we understand in Florida with how much sunshine we get under the law that as applicants apply, technically their application becomes public information. When we did the commissioner search here, the Attorney General said we could not redact cell phone numbers. So obviously we had to change some of what we did. So what becomes important, you do have a closed portal. We talk about how to set that up. We actually do that at the planning meeting. We also like to talk at that time about the compensation so that when we do about 3 weeks after the initial planning meeting or a month, when we actually go out and begin the recruitment process, we need to know what that range is going to be. And we can do comps and share comps with you at either the planning meeting or the leadership meeting, which is within, as I said, 3 weeks. That's when we present the profile, which not only gives you the characteristics of what your various focus groups, you know who said it, you know what your teaching staff said, you know what your administrators said, you know what the community who may not have children in the schools are saying about the school. So that's part of that whole engagement process. Anything that we...
The only thing that I'd like to add is that the engagement process itself is such an important part of what we do, getting to know you, getting to know your district, getting to know the priorities that need to be addressed urgently, and what need to go a little lower on the list as far as things to do for a new superintendent. Bill's going to talk about the recruiting phase next, but we use this leadership profile once you've seen it and we talk about it to actually talk to potential candidates about your district so they know, candidates come with different skills, with different research backgrounds, with different experiences, and we like to make sure that the fit for Indian River will be a good one, and the person and the slate that we bring to you will match the needs that you have.
As we begin to look at the recruitment process, the one thing that both of us admitted during the planning process is to decide on advertising and what type of advertising you want to do. Our experience is anywhere from 50 to 60% of candidates come from the various sources that we recommend for advertising. And about 40, sometimes as much as 50%, we go out and we recruit. One of the things that has concerned me, especially back in the day when It seemed that in Florida, there was a network of old boys or old girls, and they got recycled, and that's changed significantly in recent years. So when we go out, we will look for people that don't know that their next job may be Indian River, that don't know. They may be where they are, and they may be looking for a new challenge or think about a new challenge. So that's part of the recruitment process and part of what is provided during that process. Generally, we like to have the recruitment process cover about a 45-day period. It can be more, it can be less. Frankly, after about 60 days you're not going to yield a lot of candidates. Now, in Florida, it sometimes is unique in that many candidates won't apply until the last 24 hours before the deadline, so that they're not public prior to that. And if that's their choice, that's fine, as long as we know and we communicate with those people. And applications have been subpoenaed and so forth, so you know that's part of the process. And candidates are advised that's part of the process. We were amazed at the number of applicants that you received for the interim position, which is, to Dr. Moxley hands, you know, that's quite a field. We would expect in a superintendent search, now in Beaufort, we had 110 applicants. But let's say the norm, which is closer to 60. Usually what happens, about 20 had no business ever applying, would not qualify, just would not be the right fit. And then another 20 you probably would whittle down that don't match the leadership characteristics that you've come up with. And we'll then focus on probably a third of the candidates. Now, the good news is, as an applicant applies, each of us and our team will get an email saying that the Frontline system, formerly AppleTrack, has a new applicant for Indian River. So we look at them on a real-time basis. Why is that important? Well, one potential calendar in the proposal calls for the cutoff date to be December 16th. And that's only if it was going to be a year long, and obviously that could be adapted if it were different. Well, when that happens, we like to, first of all, not get in a position so that December 16th we're starting to look at applicants, because what if the pool isn't as strong as it should be? So we look at it on a daily basis. We discuss them, our team will discuss them. So that becomes very important as far as the recruiting process.
And if you don't mind, just thinking about, Bill and I, when we were talking about Indian River specifically, the recruiting process for Indian River, I'm very excited about, because I think that you have so many good things going on here that can, I believe, convince people who are already doing the job somewhere well, want to come to a beautiful area like Indian River County. There are many things that we would be looking for. And Bill he talked about the sunshine laws. When we're talking to candidates who are successful where they are, they're successful because they have good relationships with their boards of ed, with the members of their boards of ed. And so I want to be clear that when we're recruiting, it becomes, it's difficult for many people to want to put themselves out there publicly when they have a good relationship with their board. And what I see as a plus for Indian River is you are a destination, you are a place where people would want to come, and I think that we could convince people who are already doing a good job. I have several in mind as we speak who may be potential good candidates for you. But again, I'd have to get to know your needs a little bit more, but I do believe that Indian River is the type of place where people who are already doing the job well would want to investigate, and that says a lot for what you've been doing over the years, and also how well we would recruit at our different national, around the state and nationally.
I think there is one caveat that we would add. We're not looking for candidates that want to get out of the cold in the Northeast and they're ready to retire. And we find that in Florida. I just found it in Beaufort County, where Hilton Head is their jewel, that there were people that, well, I've got one more superintendency left in me, and we know that if that's not the fit, and we discourage that type of applicant, because it's got to be the right reason both ways. Once the recruitment phase is completed, we do a vetting process, and one of the first things, even before we set up an interview, is obviously you Google the person and find out everything you can about them. I mean, we did it for each of you, and you may have done it for
us too.
But that's one of the things, and when there's a lot of exposure, it's very important, and sometimes it's one thing, it's one Facebook situation that may have created a situation that could disqualify a candidate for what a district is looking for, what their needs are, especially if it gets to integrity in any way. So. We'll do that whole background and vetting process, and we like to then present to the board a slate as we go into that presentation phase, a slate of anywhere between 6 and 10 candidates. Now, because you have a board portal, and we can do this electronically, if you as a board want to see all of the applicants, we can do that. And I've had boards, well, I'll give you an example. In Springford, Pennsylvania, we did a Saturday meeting with the board, and the board said there were 65 applicants. You presented 10, and only 3 were from Pennsylvania. Why? When you had 17 applicants from Pennsylvania. We said, well, they didn't match your district profile characteristics that you identified. And the board said, well, and they decided they wanted to look at them. So they took an hour and looked at them. They said, thank you. We understand why you didn't put those people in. On the other hand, in New Britain, Connecticut, the board said, that happened to be 8 candidates, how come this one person wasn't put in who is an assistant superintendent in an adjoining district? And we said, we didn't think they measured up. The board said, I want to put the individual in. They used to work in our district. We know who the individual is. First round of interviews, they eliminated the individual. But that's a board prerogative, because this is your decision. We'll provide the expertise, but ultimately, even with all the community input, now you may get pressure from the community, but it's your decision ultimately. So that's that part of the process. I'm mindful of time.
Doing okay, half an hour.
We okay? Okay. So when we get to that point, and you do the interviews, and if you'll notice in the calendar we propose back-to-back Saturdays. All of us can have fatigue. All of you have other kinds of things you do, responsibilities. And we find that if you do the night interviews, a couple a night, first of all, it becomes hard to get everyone there on all those nights. So if you commit a Saturday, we find that it works well. Fatigue generally doesn't set in. It's a single purpose. So when you get to that point, we use a couple of techniques with the information. One is called the Delphi technique. You're a smaller board in terms of numbers, but sometimes, especially with larger boards, we ask you to review the application, the letter of endorsement, the references individually. We take several hours to do that. And then we ask you to compare, let's say there are 10, candidate 1 to 2 and forced selection. Pick one of the 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, et cetera, 2 to 3. We then collect those up, give you the matrix back. Because this is Florida, we have to put your name on it. And then you start your discussion. And it actually helps you to see where people are, but you're not influenced by what someone else may be thinking until you've put your thoughts on paper. So once that happens, then you start the discussion and decide who you want to interview. The other technique that we use, depending on the number of candidates, as a board collectively, we try to get you, 5 of you to say, this is who we don't want to interview. So they're the 2 methods that we generally use to try and bring consensus. The Delphi technique works extremely well.
I found that what that does is it helps bring into focus what you already agree on as a board, as far as priorities that are reflected in the resumes and applications. So that allows you to start from that positive place of where you can agree, and you interview those top candidates, and then the discussion becomes usually, if you want to interview 8, it usually is between the 6th and the 10th applications that you spend your time discussing, but it does allow for the board discussion to be very focused, and it takes away any type of disagreements on other issues that have happened over the past months, and really focuses it on the qualities of the application and the qualities of the references, et cetera. So it quantifies that information for you.
As part of the select process, before the slate is presented or directly after, we'll do a workshop with the board on the whole questioning process. We'll assist with questions. We obviously talk about the things you shouldn't answer. You have counsel or shouldn't ask, but you have counsel to advise on that as well, certainly. But we go through that as part of the process, as part of the service, as part of the whole fee structure. Once you get past the semifinalist and you select finalists, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, we offer a couple of options, which again is part of the overall fee, into how you want to bring the community back in, if at all, but how you want to bring the community back into the process. In Collier, which has 5 people on their board as well, Collier, each of the board members was allowed to bring some constituents in, and they got 1 hour with the 2 finalists as part of it. They did a community forum where meet and greet, and the community got to meet and greet the 2 finalists. And then finally, we offer, if you decide to do a forum and you're actually going to have questions to ask and so forth, one of us will moderate that. Now in Collier, they had Lois Tome, the Fort Myers anchor for, I think, Wink News there, we supplied the questions based on what people submitted over the internet and on cards. So that all depends. And we talk about at the planning meeting, although you don't have to decide at that time, to what extent do you want the community involved at the end of the process. The beginning of the process, it's very important for the community, for you to be as transparent as possible so the community knows what you're doing, knows what the firm is doing, and you can provide, actually from what we put on the portal, regular updates to the community. We'll also, once you select, we'll help with a press release. If you choose for us to work with your counsel or whomever would negotiate the contract, we can provide information there. We're not attorneys, but we have had some experience with contracts and can provide some input, especially as to where some of the landmines may be, knowing what some of the other representatives may be doing for the successor superintendent. That's, we also then offer to meet with the board and the new superintendent or the board chair and the new superintendent, especially to go over what came out of the community SWOT analysis and how you might want to look at that as you begin together to set goals. And as you begin together, and you can actually sometimes do that as part of the contract. You work together, you have increments, you're realistic, and it's a good time because it's a honeymoon time. So it's a good time to do that.
I've worked with incoming superintendents to take our leadership profile, the community survey, and actually create their 90-day plan, their onboarding plan from there, that they work with the board to address whatever the concerns or the goals are. So it becomes a way to start in the district on a positive note.
knowing that our time is getting to a point, I'd like to just talk about the guarantees, if I could, for just a minute.
Could,
Uh,
just to, if we have 5 minutes of questions each, if you continue for 2 more minutes, that would give us each the 5 minutes each, so,
2 minutes is it?
or
Thank
you can use the 7 and we'll have 4 minutes of questions each.
We'll be very quick.
Okay.
The fee, and if there are questions on fee, is a fixed price for the fee. Their advertising is separate. We'll answer that probably in a question. We will not solicit a candidate that we've placed for a minimum of 3 years, and unless the board puts in writing they want us to solicit that candidate. We will do a price match if it's apples to apples. The other part of the client satisfaction is we'll come out, and if the person leaves within 2 years, providing the board does not change in majority compass, we'll come back and do the search free if the person doesn't work out. That doesn't happen very often. If it does, we didn't do our job, but we guarantee that we'll come back. The only charges are expenses and advertising.
Okay, well, perfect. So what we're going to do at this time, we have 5 minutes each for our board members, and I'm going to just go in the same order we did with the last group. Mrs. Barrenborg?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation and all the information you gave us. It was wonderful to look through. And I appreciate you being here, even with the weather. So, first question, what current searches are you conducting right now?
Currently, I'm working in Edison, New Jersey. They're about a 12,000 student school district. We're presenting the leadership slate there, so we are past the engagement, the recruitment process, and they'll be starting interviewing. So I don't anticipate that there would be any conflict. That is the only other search I'm currently working on.
I just completed Beaufort County, South Carolina, about 22,000 students. And I am doing a small New Jersey district, Willingboro, New Jersey, that we previously did 7 years ago, and they asked us to come back when the superintendent left.
How will you help us minimize our expenses as we go through this?
That's a good question. Well, we would obviously spend judiciously with our travel expenses and do our best to use the portal as much as possible for communications. I've worked with boards who prefer to do some of our conversations, even planning sessions, electronically. We would obviously be more than willing to do that. The trip down here was a short, it was a short flight. So I would do my best to keep travel expenses low. I will tell you, we didn't talk about the expenses, the optional expenses for in-depth background checks once you have a finalist or finalists. I would highly recommend that you employ that service. These are very in-depth. We will be doing reference checks along the way, reaching out to our contacts and really trying to give you the best knowledge we have at the time of any slate of candidates. But as you know, the superintendent is a very public position. Our in-depth firm with which we would ask you to contract, if you decided to do that, would go in much more detail, especially even as far as credit checks and things of that nature, so that you could be sure that that the person you're getting is who you think they are.
Okay, great, thank you.
I'm sorry, also university degree, verifications, et cetera. We had some problems with that, not with our firm, but in some states.
What supports do you have in place for after the final selection? I know you had some other things, and that's I'm sorry. I have a hard time with my voice right now. What supports do you have in place after the selection? So you mentioned that you're going to do some things as part of the transition phase. How many meetings do you have with that superintendent? What do you do for us? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
We do have, we have as I said, we'll do a transition meeting with the superintendent and the board. We do have optional services for governance workshops with the board, for roles and relations workshops, if you so choose. And we do offer a program where we'll provide a mentor for the superintendent for the first year. They are fee-based and are separate than the fee, but we do have a full line of services to work with the board, including upgrading with the board and new superintendent the strategic plan, although I know it runs through 2022. That's another service that can be provided.
And a service that's included, that transition meeting, we, as your representatives, will be working very closely with that successful candidate. Like I said, there's typically we work with them for the 90-day onboarding, and any type of goals that you have for them, we would work together.
Okay, and did you just say 1 minute? Yep. Okay, and so, last question I had is, what recommendations do you have for us in forming a citizens committee? How would you go about that? Would you do a citizens committee, or would you just get an input from citizens?
Well, I think you could do a combination. Our online survey really allows anyone in your community, they identify themselves as a community member, a teacher, a parent. As Bill said, you can have up to 6 groups as far as how they identify themselves. So I would encourage you to cast the net widely for that information, but to then be very strategic about the groups that you choose. Depending, I would always suggest that you have your staff involved at some point as a separate group, because they have issues that are different from the community. But if you have one community group, I would say make sure you have all of your areas of the district represented, and all of the ages of students represented, and then students, people with children in the district and people who don't have children in the schools represented. So I think you have to make sure you listen to all of those constituents.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you for being here. I appreciate your presence and your information. The packet is very thorough. I want to piggyback off of a question that Mrs. Berenborg just mentioned to you regarding the Community Advisory Committee, or some sort of committee of that kind. How much involvement would you have, if you can expand upon that a little bit, how much involvement would you have in a Community Advisory Committee, if you would have any involvement at all? What would that look like if you were to if the board were to put together or kind of facilitate that committee? Would you all allow us to do that separately from your involvement, or would you be present at those meetings? Well, how would that work?
We certainly would work to coordinate. One of the decisions when you decide to have advisory groups, community groups, you have to set the parameters out front. What is the role of that group? Because ultimately, sometimes, depending on the parameters that you set, that group wants to vote on the final candidate. Or if they favor a candidate and the board favors another candidate, it starts off with a bad relationship for whomever you hire. Community input can be outstanding. I've worked in a district where, as part of the interview process, there was a group of internal stakeholders identified. And we sat in one of our reps sat in with them. They interviewed the candidate, while another group of external candidates, external members of the community, interviewed another candidate. The third part of that, there were 4 parts of it. The third part of that process, the person was, each of the candidates were given an in-basket, out-basket, and a computer. Here's a problem in the district. How would you respond to it? And they had an hour to do that, and that was used as part of the final questions when questions were asked. And then the 4th group was the Board of Ed interviewing. So it can be as detailed as you want, and usually at the planning meeting, we'll talk about all of the options, and then you decide, and what we'll keep coming back to you and saying is, just make sure that you set the parameters. Where does the role start? Where does the role end? And it can be very effective if you choose to go that way.
And just to add, that is why we suggest putting the community input at the very beginning of the process. That helps us create a profile from which to recruit rather than an advisory group to choose a candidate. They're two different parts of the process, and obviously, at our planning meeting, you all get to decide how the community should be involved, but we do typically recommend that the community is involved earlier in the process. They can see the reflection of their comments in the leadership profile. We make sure that all the themes are adequately addressed, so everyone feels that their opinions are valued and part of the process, but the ultimate decision on candidates rests with the Board of Education.
Okay, I have a question regarding the portal. I'm assuming that your organization manages the portal in terms of what goes in, what comes out. I have some concerns there. I know you mentioned public records, Florida law. You mentioned something about understanding Florida law. What is your extent in allowing full access to anything that goes into that portal on our end, so that legally we are not going to, be accused of withholding something from public record or having a delay in access to something within this portal?
1 minute.
The portal, anything that goes up on the portal ultimately could become public information, so that's not going to be a problem. The final candidates, when that is done, that's done live with the board. And whether it qualifies as executive session or not, that again gets generally determined by council in Florida. But as far as what goes on the portal, you have the heads up as a board member. You get it daily. It can go public anytime you want to do it. In Beaufort County, when the board met, they had the portal up on 2 big screens, and they shared it with the audience behind them.
We do a lot of communicating on where we are in the process. We might not use names, but we've spoken to this many people. We're gathering information on this. Here's the survey data we have so far. We use it as a way to make sure you're aware of where we are in the process the whole time. But that all could become public, and it's something that we would say in a public meeting too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Schiff?
Thank you for being here today and for a great presentation. I have way more questions than 5 minutes is going to allow me. Really intrigued by what you found on Google about all of us. Tell me, of the districts that you've worked with so far, roughly speaking, a percentage, how many have hired from in-state?
Oh, that's a good question.
So,
I'm about 50-50.
About 50-50.
yeah, I'd probably go 60-40.
And you and I,
60-40 coming from in-state.
and you and I are into restorative justice.
Love to have that conversation.
Now, the problem is that some of the states vary so much, and so one of the things that happens too, you'll get someone who will go out of state, be successful, and then decide they want to return, for whatever reason, to the state. We've had that in particular on the west coast of the country, not the west coast of Florida, but the west coast of the country, where we've had people from the east go out, take a job in California, and for some of the same reasons people might come to Florida in terms of weather, Southern California at least, and they make a decision that they want to come home. So it really varies. Midwest, it's more the 60-40. In New Jersey recently, because of a cap on superintendent salaries, which you do have in Florida, but it doesn't affect you. It's on state money, not on overall. There was a much greater number of people coming from in-state, from lower level positions, because they simply couldn't attract people with the salaries.
Well, and the reason I ask is simply because as a national firm, one of the advantages you bring is national recruitment and expertise about what's going on outside of Florida. On the other hand, that's simultaneously an advantage and a disadvantage, right? One of the things that is unique to Florida is we have very, very strict sunshine laws. And we have very, very strict requirements on what we as a board can do, what we have to do in the public. To what degree would you say that advantages or may advantages an internal, or may disadvantage a candidate from out of state, or is irrelevant? What's your take on that?
It really depends on the profile of the candidates from out of state. What will often happen in a Florida search, and I said it early on, is that the candidates will be talking with us, and they won't apply until the last 24 hours, which puts a burden on us if we haven't already had a conversation with them. The other thing that we have found with the system we use, often people will put all their information in the system but won't press the submit button. If they haven't pressed the submit button, we know they're to be a likely candidate, but we can't speak for them, and even with any subpoenas we've had in the past, we've never had to release that information. So Florida Sunshine Law and Minnesota are basically very similar, and there's not a whole lot. In Collier, they conducted the superintendent's salary in public for the new superintendent for almost 6 weeks, and we had to intervene, or they were going to lose a really, really good person.
And during the recruitment process, it becomes very important in talking to people thinking about coming to Florida, because again, successful people have good relationships with their board, and when that becomes public, that could become an issue. So those are considerations in Florida that we don't have to have elsewhere.
1 minute.
Two questions I want to squeeze into a minute. So I'm going to ask them both, see if
We'll
you
do our
get them.
best.
One is, there is your base fee of what I see here is $23,500, and then there's additional costs. Can you speak a little bit about the range of additional costs you've experienced? My second question will be, what's your experience dealing with diversity issues in districts? We have a lot of issues around that.
All right, on the cost. 23.5 is the base. It includes all consulting. It includes 4 days, as Monica indicated, for stakeholder input at the front end. It includes everything we talked about. What else is there? There are expenses. Expenses are at the IRS rate if we're traveling in-state. I fly back and forth from Atlantic City to Fort Myers for $57 on Spirit Airlines. Not that I'm giving them a plug. I would not think that expenses would exceed $4,000 combined for the two of us. Big figure to look at are your advertising costs. We have, because we do volume, we have, and I think I can get into your second question with this. We have 3 packages. One goes for $1,900, and it connects you with the American Association of School Administrators. It gets you into Ed Week online. The second one is a little more expensive. I think it's $2,300, and it's in the folder there, and it tells you exactly what you get. That gets you in because the company does so many searches, that gets you in what we call our group ad, which says, here's a search, and it drives people online then to that.
I'm really sorry, but our buzzer went off, and as much as I want to hear the rest, I have to.
And then just due diligence for background checks.
I'm gonna cede my time so you can, I have a question, but I like
Okay,
those questions, and I'd like you to answer both of them, so I'll just ask my last question at that time, if you can start mine, thank you.
All right. So the other fee around that we haven't, so the last package is $6,300. It includes Ed Week in print. It includes every time, and Ed Week is published 39 times a year, every time we publish in there, which is every other issue, it gets you into group ad, it gets you into AASA. And then we recommend 2 others, which I think gets to the diversity part of it. ALAS, the Association of Latino School Administrators, we work with that group, and NASB, the National Alliance of Black Educators. Together, that's only like $500. So altogether, advertising, you can probably anticipate, if for a district this size, you probably would do no other advertising but the third package, which would be about $6,800. That would cover that. You look.
You told me roughly 4,000 in travel, and then you told me a $1,900, a $2,300, and a $6,300 package for advertising, but then said you'd probably get it all, you lost me.
Okay. Maybe I apologize, I may have confused. On the advertising package, there are 3 different packages.
Got that.
You can choose 1, 2, or 3, or none.
Got that?
If for this district, I would recommend package 3, which is the most expensive. It's $6,300, plus $500 for NASB and ALIS.
Why would you recommend that? Sorry if you don't.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fine. I just want to make a note, and since it is my time, I am going to say, again, I've said before in the last thing, this is the most important decision that we will make as a school board, and it will be a part of our legacy as elected officials. And as community members, I have 4 children in our public schools, extremely important decision. So the idea that we're talking about 6,000 plus 4,000, so we're, at 11, we're at 10,000, an additional 10 over the 23.5, so we're at 33, 34. These are the thousands of dollars we're talking about here as far as advertising are concerned. I am not concerned about. We're going to have to spend some money to get a quality search firm. So while I respect that and I agree you have questions regarding that, I think we're talking, if I'm clear, probably anywhere between a variance between what your base is to about $11,000 at the most. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay.
The only fee not covered would be the due diligence background check that we recommend a third-party firm. You can get a background check for $125. This is an on-site investigator that goes to the county where the person resides. They do a criminal, civil, financial, driving record. They check the institutions that issued the credentials. They also check the degrees people have and whether the institution could award that degree, and there's some that award them that shouldn't be. And the other thing that particular package includes is a 5-year media review and a social media review.
That's
And we
that
only-
Eubanks, that's the
Yes,
hazard,
Baker
that's the
Eubanks.
Baker Eubanks
Baker Eubanks,
due
yes.
diligence report. Okay. May I? Mrs. Rourke, thank you. So you have previously worked with Ray and Associates
Yes.
in your past, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Florida School Board Association. We are members of the Florida School Board Association for professional development purposes, and they did speak to us earlier today regarding some of their search experience. I have said before, I will state again, that some of their greatest strengths are also their greatest weaknesses in recruiting, and those relationships are as beneficial as they can be challenging in recruiting. So if you could just speak quickly as to why we should select you. I'd like to, you've worked with Ray and Associates, you're familiar with Florida School Board and their relationships within districts.
I think the thing that we
60
offer
seconds.
is,
No pressure.
Sorry.
first of all, you're getting a national firm, but you're getting a local flavor. And I think the stakeholder input at the front end of the process, difference when I work for Ray and Associates, they do a survey as well. It's not research-based. This is research-based. The thing that we learned over the last couple of years, after the firm's been doing this for 35 years, is that the community input, as that community input gives you the SWOT analysis. It's not just about, the leadership characteristics are going to be very similar. And at the end, does the person also, have the ability to walk on water? But it's not all about that. It's about fit. And I can tell you this, that if you look at the national averages and then you look at ours, we're about 5.2 years per placement. The national average is much lower than that. So.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
We'll just get you good fit.
No, we have 3 minutes, so I'll just put my questions out there and we'll see what you can get through. I appreciate you coming in. This is a very thorough, well thought through presentation. It just shows the quality of work that we could expect from your group. So very, very nice presentation. A couple of my questions that I would like to ask. You have 4 consulting days. Would 2 of those consulting days include the town halls at both the high schools, and what would the other 2 be? That's one question. You answered where you would advertise, but I would like to know where in Florida would you go to recruit candidates in Florida that have Florida experience. I'm hearing the outside of the state, the ed and those groups. And then my last question is, I'm intrigued by a national firm with a local reach. So could you expand on that? Exactly what are you saying there?
I'm going
I
to
know
try to
you
be very
touched on
quick
that.
so that we can get to all three. As far as the consulting days are concerned, as I mentioned, I do a lot of the focus groups and interviews for our firm. I just enjoy talking to people and getting to know the issues of the district. We work with you during the planning meetings to plan as many as we can. I have worked in districts where I start at 7 a.m. meeting with groups and I end at 10 p.m. meeting with different groups. So it's really only limited by your ability to cram that many meetings into a day, and we'll get as many, you get 4 of those. So then I'll let you go ahead with, the second one was national reach, local, and then how to recruit in Florida.
Well, 2 was, how will you reach? I see you're very good at national, but how will you recruit within the state if that is a priority?
Well,
With
may
experience
I
here in
answer?
Florida, yeah.
Well, as far as in Florida, we certainly have worked with the Florida School Administrators Group. Go back, and I know School Boards was the other group in here, used to work with Wayne Blanton when Wayne was here in Florida. Know a lot of the Florida superintendents as we reach out. Certainly, because I live in Collier, I keep in close touch with Camilla Patton, and that helps. But we also, at the national level, and you say, well, how do you get Florida people at the national level? Well, we participate both in national school boards is not as effective as the American Association of School Administrators because you have more administrators there. Last year at the national conference, I interviewed 12 candidates for Beaufort County, and 5 of them were from South Carolina. So I think the national reach thing is that, number one, the amount of focus group and the pre-planning part of it that we do, the fact that you can be in touch with us, if not through the portal, through live or through Skype, provides that local touch. You know, I refer to a lot of the communities in Florida along the coast as urban beach, or sometimes urban rural beach. You could, you know, when you look at this county. So we have a feel. We have attended and have had representatives at some of the state conferences as well.
Okay. Do we still have time? Can you explain again, national firm with a local reach?
Well,
That's
just during
interesting.
during our planning session, when you would be talking about the types of candidates or the experiences that you would most prefer, if those experiences are from people in Florida, both Bill and I will be talking to them about how they made those, the accomplishments that they have, and recruit from there. So we would recruit based on your priorities, and if those priorities can be met with people in Florida, we will absolutely be talking to them.
Okay.
As you look at how generally searches go, you'll have Florida in-state, then you'll have the states around Florida, which are the region, and then you have the national. And they shake out that way. We'll certainly focus on people that understand and need to understand Florida and how Florida works.
Last but not least, our website is a go-to place for administrators across the country. We list not only the openings we're running, the searches that we're running, but all searches. So we do get a lot of response to our website.
Okay, well, our time is up. You have a lot of fascinating information. It was a great presentation. I'm sure we all had more questions, but we appreciate you guys coming out today and spending an hour with us, and we hope to make a decision today. So,
Thank you very much.
Please note, you have our cell phone. We would be available to you all 24/7 if you need us. So.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
If you make a decision today, would you notify us, the office, or?
I think we would have Dr. Moxley.
Live on TV, you
Yes.
can watch it.
Yeah,
That's true.
Dr.
You can
Moxley reach
bring it
out
up on
to
your
you,
phone on YouTube.
Okay.
Because,
we will call you.
yes,
Thank you.
definitely.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Nice to meet you all.
Thank you,
Nice to
you
meet
too.
you.
Why don't we go ahead and take a 5-minute and come back at 3:21?
Okay.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
this meeting back to order at 3:23. We went into recess for a few minutes. We are in the middle of our special business meeting. It is August 6, 2019. At this time, we just finished up presentations for the interviews of the superintendent search firms. But at this time, before we go into, before we go into that discussion, we need to go ahead and approve the consent agenda. So I need a motion.
Move approval.
I'll second.
Mrs. Justice?
No, ma'am.
Mrs.
Nope. I'm fine.
Ladies?
No,
thank you. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
5-0. Dr. Moxley, would you like to speak? We had a couple of really nice promotions and hires in.
We did, and we have a new principal that will be taking the helm at Pelican Island Elementary School, Rachel Morey. She is going to be reporting there tomorrow and starting, and I really want to highlight Chris Kolstad for being willing to go to Wabasso as principal. That's a lateral move for him, but it's an important move. He has such a skill set and a leadership style that I think will take Wabasso to the next level for our students and our parents, and I'm just so thankful for his leadership. And I know that Rachel Morey will do an outstanding job carrying on the good work that Mr. Kolstad has started at Pelican Island. So those are two highlights. We are definitely working fast and furious to make sure every classroom has a teacher by the end of Friday, so that we're starting our school day. You know, we know some things can change that we may not know about, but we're really working diligently with our principals, and thanks to HR for their work with that. So I think that highlights those two.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
We are moving into our action agenda. We did not have anything from consent to move over. At this time, what we need to do, so we can begin the discussion, is I need a motion for approval of superintendent recruitment firm.
I move that we contract with Hazard and Young to move forward in searching for a superintendent.
Point of clarification.
Uh-huh.
Are we making a motion for a specific organization, or are we making a motion to move forward
Discussion.
to discuss what firm we're, like, are we motioning for a specific firm, or are we motioning that we're going,
Well, there's several ways we could do this. The motion was made for Hazard and Young. If we have a second on that, then we can begin a discussion, and then if there needs to be an amendment, we can amend it to how we want to amend it, and then move forward that way. Just because we have a second on Hazard and Young, it doesn't tie you to that firm. Because I have some clarification I need to get from Dr. Moxley.
You can say I
Anyways.
second for discussion, which doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
mean that you're agreeing with me, you
Mhm.
just are saying, let's discuss it.
Right.
You have to have a motion in order to.
So
move
I'm
to-
going to second it for discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. If you don't mind, Mrs. Justice, I know you have the motion on the floor. I would like to get clarification from Dr. Moxley, because we did ask her to reach out to Ray and Associates and just get that clarification on the reasoning or status, or what were their intents.
Yes, I did speak with an individual today at the contact that was listed in the proposal. Molly was the original person that returned a call to Peggy Poisel on 7/25, declined doing a presentation. I did follow up. The individual that I spoke with today was not Molly. Molly was out. And I asked the question that we had received that message from Molly, per Molly, that they had declined. And I said, are you wanting, I needed just clarification. Did you decline from doing a presentation because you couldn't attend on that date? Or and you wanted the proposal to be considered? Were you not wanting to be considered at all anymore? She indicated that she believed, but she was going to try and get in touch with Molly, but I did not hear back from them, obviously, before we came in here today. But her thinking is that they could not come because they did not have a team available to come and do the presentation. But the proposal was still to be considered. She did indicate that they had a team in Marion County today and tomorrow, and that it was her understanding that there probably was not a team available.
Okay. All right, well, that's good. Do you want to speak to your motion?
Sure, I'm happy to. I think both of the groups that we met with today would do a fine job. And I enjoy our relationship with FSBA, and I think they'll continue being partners with us and helping us to go through a superintendent search, because that is truly what their role is as a professional development organization. Those parts of support and help will continue on. I wanted to ask that question today, but they were here presenting as a search firm, so I didn't know exactly how they support districts who choose not to use them as a search firm, how they continue to support them. But it is my understanding in speaking with other board members around the state that they do in fact continue to support their school board members that are members of their organization, even if they choose to work with a different search firm. Because of that, I feel that the layered approach is helpful. I do have a concern that the Florida School Board Association is working with so many districts that are currently either hiring superintendents or looking to hire superintendents in the coming 18 months. Marion County is using Ray and Associates. They are there today and are working with them today and tomorrow. Marion County will have a similar time frame as us. They have about 43,000 students. We have about 18,000. Although it seems like a big difference, to be honest with you, we're kind of in the same area as them as far as group. We're not super small, we're not super big, we're kind of in that middle area. So superintendents that may be looking at Marion County may be looking here as well. I was impressed by Hazard and Young. I thought that their presentation was thorough. I like the idea of working with a recruiting firm who will go out and will actively recruit. I know that Dr. Schiff had some comments there, made some comments about diversity, and I know that we do deal with certain areas like the desegregation order and some achievement issues that, while that may be unique to us in some ways, but that are not necessarily unique at a state or national level, and we may be able to actively recruit superintendents, candidates, through Hazard and Young in that way. As I said before, I'm looking for someone as a superintendent who wants an opportunity, not someone who's looking for a job. I feel that Hazard and Young is well equipped to be able to find that person. They seem professional, direct, and their pricing is somewhat in line with the rest. Price alone will not be just the consideration for me. I feel that all of the pricing in general is similar. We are talking about, several $1,000s at the most, perhaps $5,000 variation when we look at everything included. I made the motion for Hazard and Young today. I believe it's the right way for us to move forward, and I do believe it's in the best interest of the students, the families, and our community to be able to move forward as quickly as possible with a superintendent search at this time.
Okay. I did second this, but I definitely want to, I seconded it so that we can have more discussion about this. I too was, I went in here because we had such a wonderful experience with Florida School Board Association. I had, a leaning toward that group just because of our relationship, but I was thoroughly impressed with the amount of statistical and just the research-based and just, this presentation, and it just top-notch, and that just reeks that where they go and where they're going to recruit, they're reaching out to those top-notch. Now, obviously, we've not talked about this, but it will come up eventually. When we went into the interim, I was open to outside Florida interims, and now having Dr. Moxley with her experience of Florida, to me, that's invaluable. So one of my concerns with Hazard and Young is, will they be able to really pull the ones from inside of Florida with Florida experience and bring them to us like FSBA can bring to us? But this is the very beginning of this conversation, and so I just wanted to open it up and second it so we can get the input from the board members. So who would like to weigh in on this?
Mrs. Strick, I just had a comment on what you said. May I share something quickly while someone next decides to speak? So funny, because when we went into the interim search, I very much felt that we needed a Florida candidate for the interim. But for this national part, now that we have Mr. Fagan with his FEFP and Florida finance experience, I don't feel that it's as important. I think the qualities that I would be looking for, again, someone with a vision, with a track record of success, some of the leadership qualities that are going to be the same across the board, no matter who we're really looking at. And I think we actually share a lot of thoughts about those types of leadership qualities that we're looking for. The Florida experience for me personally isn't as important right now, but Mr. Fagan has helped bring some stability for that for me.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you want us to go in order, or?
Mrs. Berenborg, would you like to go?
First?
Yes, if you would.
I'll agree. I agree with what you just said, Ms. Justice, because I had the same feeling. Like I really, as a matter of fact, the paper that I wrote when I was in surgery, or right before I went to surgery, and gave to Dr. Moxley at your last meeting, that I watched later and noticed that it wasn't read, was about how important it was to have somebody with a lot of experience. I think that that's helped us a lot through this transition, is Dr. Moxley's experience as a superintendent, but also with Florida experience. And I agree with you, now that we have Mr. Fagan here, I think that we're in a better boat than we were before, and we're not paddling as hard. So I think we can look at the qualities that we want in this individual, which I think we need a dynamic person that's going to help us with our diversity and help us with all the things that we've got on our plate right now. So having said that, looking at both of these applications, they're very similar, and yet there are some nuances that are unique about each one. I like the fact that HYA has a national team that they can use, and I like the portal idea, and I like the fact that they're going to do an extensive search for us. I think they'll have a much more extensive search than FSBA will nationally. I think I do have some concerns, though, about Florida, whether or not we want that, if we want a Florida superintendent, because like they said, they're working in Collier right now, but that was the only district that I noticed.
They're done working at Collier.
Yeah, they're done working
Right.
Collier, but that was the only one that I had noticed that they had worked with. So that was a little bit of a concern. I did look in their history. They had one or two others in their past that they have worked with in Florida. The other thing is, yes, expenses. I do care about budget, so I do care about expense. That's why you heard me say what I said. You know, I wrote that down as one of my number one questions. How are you going to help us minimize expenses? Because the one thing I read in the packet from HYA is a lot of Skyping, a lot of electronic communication that we can have with them that will not allow us to have airplane tickets down or whatever. So I think that does matter a little bit if we're looking into exactly which one, and it tips the scales. FSBA, I think, is more local, and they're more convenient to us. Yes, they've been extremely helpful. They're very knowledgeable about superintendents in Florida. I'm not sure how much their national search is, though. And I think in this respect, I have changed. I wanted to look at just Florida. And I think that we're in a better shape now. We need to look for the dynamic person, an individual that we need here. And so I'm willing to look at HYA.
I think that with regard to presentation, HYA, their presentation was beautiful and very thorough, but I don't want us to get blinded by the packet. what we did not receive, what I did not receive from a nice presentation, was the personal touch. And I did not, I fear that because they are not local, that they're not going to be as readily available to us as Florida School Board Association would be. And that the building of relationship, that is just really going to be about work. We're here to do this, and that's it, see you later. And that every minute that goes over the hour that they're here, we're going to be charged. Whereas with FSBA, it's all basically included. So for example, we were talking quite a bit about the, having a community advisory committee. If we were to go in that direction, Florida School Board Association would be present at all community advisory committees. They'd guide them, they'd facilitate, they would make sure that, you know, the advisory committees are not overstepping their bounds. The HYA would not do that. They would guide us initially, but anytime they would come in, if we wanted them to come in for the Community Advisory Committee, we'd have to pay them extra. That concerns me because you keep adding these extra fees on there, and we're going to have an extraordinarily high bill for them. In addition to that, having the 3 counties that they're currently working, let me just back up and say this. We haven't discussed this as a board in terms of our timeline, and I think that this is important too. With regard to my view, my personal view, I would like to see Dr. Moxley stay as long as possible for the school year. And let me explain why I would like that. That's my opinion. Others may have different opinions, but that's my opinion. We have had a lot of change in our district. There's a lot of hiring and letting go, a lot of turnover. If we were to have Dr. Moxley here as long as possible, that's not putting off of the table, you know, having the new superintendent come in and kind of have this onboarding process for transition. That's not what I'm talking about. We have staff here that have developed a relationship and goal setting with Dr. Moxley, and to have Dr. Moxley actually do their end-year evaluation is very important because there's already established work that she could rightly evaluate. Having a new superintendent come on board in January, so, you know, or February, building relationships with staff members here, that person is not going to be really that well equipped to do an end-year evaluation on a 4-month stay here. They're really not going to get a good picture of the work that the staff has actually put in for an entire year. So that's just something, there's a lot of other reasons why I think Dr. Moxley should stay on for as long as possible. I don't think that we have a rush in this process because Dr. Moxley is efficient, well competent to do the job. It can give us enough time to really vet if we want a committee in place, who those committee members should be, how long they should meet, and, you know, I just don't want to feel like there would be a rush. That said, we don't have to run side by side with some of these other districts. We can work it out with FSBA or HYA to ensure that there aren't any conflicts. HYA have some upcoming contracts of their own that might, if one is going to serve as a conflict, then so might the other. So we can always work within a year, we can always work with both organizations on that front. So that's not really a concern for me in terms of, you know, conflict of time. They do have experience with Florida, we know that. They have experience in superintendent searches. This is not their first rodeo. They respond immediately and personally, and we've experienced that with them. That's not something that I get a feel that HYA, they may or may not. I really couldn't get a feel there. I think communication is extremely important. Something that I also noted is that this portal that they were talking about, I have concerns with the portal and public records, and I know that they said that we can have access to it on a daily basis and that we could, I think the wording was, you could make it public at any time that you want, but that's not an opinion. It is law. And we have to make sure that we establish anything that goes into this portal that is managed by an outside firm is not our management. Whereas, if some of you who like this idea of a portal, we could create our own portal. We now have board docs. We could create a shared file. I mean, we can find ways to have that same idea of putting all of the applications in this one place so that we have access to it. I don't think that going with FSBA would not give us that opportunity. The engagement phase that they meant, that HYA mentioned, which is the first phase, that they give only 4 days. FSBA gives us unlimited days. Additional days, if you go over, which maybe we won't, but if we do, it's $1,000 per day in this engagement period. And who makes that decision? At any day, they can come back and say, well, we need 2 extra days to complete this process. Who makes that decision? So again, you're adding more fees onto something that's already included with FSBA. The community input, I asked a question about, going back to the Community Advisory Committee, what their role in that would be. And I have a note here, this does not exclude, oh, I mentioned that before already, that FSBA could be a part of all committee meetings. Okay, let me come off of there. FSBA had a clear understanding and was able to articulate and know our goals, so they already have an established relationship with us. HYA did not provide that. So I didn't see where they have, I mean, I know that, I forget her name that was sitting there.
Dr. Brown.
Dr. Brown, she pulled up our strategic plan and she read off our points from the strategic plan. But the understanding and the articulation beyond the strategic plan of our goals was actually articulated better, with more understanding and with a personal feel, or rather a personal investment by Dr. Vogel, in my opinion. I also think that the knowledge, Florida education law and knowledge of sunshine, and district politics, understanding of all of that. I think Florida School Board Association would have an upper hand in that area. One thing that I hear from fellow board members is the idea of a national search. I'm not tied down to Florida or national. I could go either way so long as we have a high-quality candidate. However, just because a national firm has national potential doesn't mean that we should disqualify FSBA from also having national outreach potential. They have indicated in their presentation and in the handouts that they maintain relationship and network with NSBA, State School Board Association Executive Directors, and the National Affiliation of Superintendent Searchers. So I don't want to disqualify FSBA just because they're Florida-based, that they wouldn't be able to recruit nationally. I believe that they have the connections, the years of doing this business with outside of the state So I don't want to disqualify them just because we have a firm that comes in with a really nice presentation package, very nicely ordered, which was beautiful, but also very pricey for the personal one-on-one that we can get from FSBA. I'm leaning towards FSBA. My last comment here is for you all for us to be on the same page as much as possible. This is not an opportunity to grandstand. This is not an opportunity to get your way. This is not an opportunity to be right or be wrong. I think we're all on the same page in that we definitely want the best person for this position to lead our district, and I definitely do not want to rush into it. I don't think that we need to, as I mentioned before, and I think that's where I'm going to leave it.
Dr. Schiff?
Well, the good news and the bad news is that I could not possibly be more torn. And that's good news because I think we do well with either of them. I think either of them are a great choice. I think either of them provide what we need. I think they are, at least in their initial cost estimates, competitive. Hazard and Young did say that they would price match, but that's on basic services, not on the additions. But so while I share Mrs. Rosario's admiration for Dr. Moxley, what I also know is that Dr. Moxley put her life on hold to come to us unexpectedly at short notice and has a life to go back to, where she has obligations. And while I hate speaking in the third person of someone in the third person who's sitting here, I do want to say that as much as I would like her to stay as well, I understand that she has a life and responsibilities and obligations to go back to, and I want to honor that. That said, in conversations that we've had, Dr. Moxley has also expressed, and I suspect may have had a variation of this conversation with each of you, wanting to do the search in a way so that somebody doesn't come in at the same time and under the same pressures that she did, having at the very last minute to deal with personnel issues and budget issues and all of the things that create incredible pressure on a superintendent as we get to the end of the academic year. And so I want to be sensitive to that in how we move forward so that somebody coming in has the opportunity to be mentored and supported by Dr. Moxley, who I know when this happened, when you retired from Lake County, stayed on as a consultant for a little while where and when necessary to help, as the term kept being used, onboard the new superintendent. I love when we create new verbs. So that said, much as I would like to see that happen, I understand that that's not, at least at the moment, in our realm of possibilities. And I want to just put that out there publicly and without speaking for you, because of course, you can speak for yourself on this. That said, I'm incredibly torn. And so in our little break, I made this little paper. I did a grid analysis for myself. And for those who are not familiar, a grid analysis is you take the characteristics that are important to you and the things that you're measuring against each other, in this case, the two organizations, and you rate them, and I did a scale of 1 to 5. And I gave myself 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 characteristics. And I made my little chart here. And the characteristics that I rated on, and the reason I'm speaking this publicly is because I want to publicly say what I did and offer the opportunity to anybody else. So the characteristics I looked at were local experience, meaning broadly Florida, availability, my general comfort with the organization and the people I'd be working with, the expense, what I learned, what I believe about their capacity to do this job, and capacity both locally and more broadly nationally, but I use that term as a catchphrase. The team that I'd be working with in that, and I ranked them. And then as I listened to Mrs. Barenborg and Mrs. Rosario, and this may change as we go down the road, I added their capacity to reach nationally, I used the word slick, that's the wrong term, but really it's the quality of the materials and the presentation that as others have mentioned, Hazard and, their materials are terrific. It's clear they know what they're doing. Then I added how they know us, because knowing us is a big thing. Anyone will get to know us. But knowing us isn't just knowing us in the amount, like starting now. Knowing us is knowing a bit of our history too, and where we've come from, and what that experience has been, for better and worse, exactly. But it matters, because nothing time doesn't start at this moment. Time is in a context. And we come to this moment with the experiences we have, which are going to guide our priorities, our community relationships, how we engage, a lot of those things. And I added the time, meaning that the time that I thought they could give us, given their team, their location, all of that. All of that said, I added everything up, and it changed at various points. And at first they came out FSBA a little ahead, then they went dead even, then when I added the others, FSBA came out a few points ahead. All of that said, I'm in a quandary, because I have strong characteristics that lend me in favor of each organization. And that's where I appreciate this dialogue, because I really want to hear from each of you. I've heard from two of you, a little bit of the two of you, but to me, I agree with Mrs. Justice. This is not a decision or a commitment we make lightly. That said, whoever we hire, I think will do a terrific job for us. So I'm really torn. I'm really, really torn.
I had one thing I wanted just to add, if I can speak after you, it's fine.
You can. Are you finished? Not that you're finished,
Yeah,
but,
but yeah, for the moment, I'm
okay.
befuddled.
So what I would like to do, I would like to ask Dr. Moxley her opinion, because we have had this conversation about a timeline and what might be an ideal time for a new superintendent and leader of the district to come in. And if you'd share your expertise and your experience with us.
Sure. Both firms all three that you got proposals from are all outstanding, and they have outstanding reputations in the areas. And there are pros and cons to each, and each has its own strengths and its own uniquenesses and those kinds of things. So I'll answer your question directly, Mrs. Zork, about timeline. Past experience, when I retired, I was leaving at the end of June, so very much like a lot of the folks you heard of the upcoming searches. The search for my replacement started at this time, and they had identified the candidate, the new superintendent, in December. They negotiated the contract. That individual started in the first part of January, I believe it was. And I was still there, so we had a transition. So some things I would say were too long, you didn't need that amount of time. And other things, I think of the time that individual came on in January. So don't think about when I was leaving or not. Just think about the new superintendent coming on in January. She had a window of time that she was able to get to know the staff, tour the schools, get to meet parents, get out to civic organizations, all those types of things in January and February, to where she had a very good understanding and foundation of the district and what was, who was what, where, when, all those kinds of things, and was able to talk. They talked about the SWOT analysis, be able to say what are the strengths, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, all those kinds of things, and make that assessment. Had a 90-day plan. That is very common for a superintendent to come in with a 90-day plan. Really should come in with that. In fact, I had to that was part of my interview process when I was selected, to present my 90-day plan as part of the interview process. So you should have that idea of that plan so you hit the ground running. That's not uncommon. Because what happens in January and February is you're really looking at your staffing. You want to staff your schools. You want to have a staffing plan to the board in January, because in February you're identifying, here are the staffing patterns. Here's where we need to make adjustments. You're doing all of that because when testing season starts in March and April, your total focus is on that. The legislative session also starts, and, depending on whether it's the year that it's January, and I think it is January this coming year, you're going to have your budget already done and through the legislative session earlier this year. So you can get a head start on that. For those reasons, and I really believe that if someone can come in January, at whatever point, beginning, mid, and whatever time that is, but somewhere in January, they can get their feet really grounded in Indian River and the school district, students, administration, stakeholders. And that's all going on in the legislative session. So the minute that budget is done at the state and the governor signs off on that, you are already having those discussions, because Mr. Fagan and I have had this conversation, that if we had a do-over, we would have started budget conversations January 1st, even knowing that the legislative session may not have even occurred until May. We would start that in January. You want your new superintendent to be very well-versed and up to speed on that. So I say that just from giving someone good lead time to know the district. Then they're already familiar, they know what the budget is, they're working with you on that. You have an opportunity in January and February to do your master board, all those kinds of things, that your retreats, your strategic plan, all those kinds of things are done. So you're actually getting ahead and letting that drive your process, letting that strategic plan drive your budget and all of that. And then you have all your positions established so that come May, when assessments are all done and all those kinds of things, you're able to make reappointments with all the knowledge and the background of putting people and making adjustments. You've got your org chart done. Now you're making those adjustments. It's fair to your staff because they've gotten to know the individual, and it's not rushed through. That is what I have to say. And I mean, yes, I've done this year after year after year, but it was challenging to come in, May 25th, when a list has already been presented to you and people have property interests in that, and then to then look and make changes. Your hands are a little tied there, and you want to be fair to your employees. Really want to do that. And then to do the org chart, I mean, I've brought that back to you twice now to tweak that. You want to do that once, and get that in place. So all those things the timelines have been a little bit different, but it's been a unique situation, and we do it, and you've been very gracious to me to allow me to bring that back multiple times. That's not typically how we want to go about and do business. But even with a new principal appointment, I would have preferred not to do that on the first day the teachers come back. That was very hard to do that, but needed to be done to meet the needs of all our students across schools in this district. So, again, and we still have a couple positions. So just knowing all that and just having lived that, I'm just saying from my perspective, if I were coming in as a new superintendent, I'd want to come in January to be able to be ahead of that time frame.
Okay.
I made a commitment to you, so, I mean, that's not an issue one way or the other. No, I'm not long-term, I know that, we've talked about that. But the other thing is that I also want you to be competitive. Because whether you go with a national firm or a state like FSBA, they all have, you can still advertise with AASA, you can, still advertise locally. So either one of them can do the job and do it well. And your timeline is your timeline. But the fact of the matter is that you want to be competitive. And with all these other searches coming online, I just know from a candidate, if I were applying, I know who, where are my first choice and my second choices. Indian River is very, very competitive. It's a desirable place to be. And I just think you want to be ahead in there to have first or second choice, and always first choice.
Okay, so we're gonna, Mrs. Rosario had her hand up, and then Mrs. Justice. And
I just want to clarify, when I said to have Mrs. Moxley stay as long as possible, I didn't mean for her to neglect her own personal life. That's not what I meant. What I meant was to be present while the new superintendent comes, as long as possible, to help with that onboarding process. That's what I meant. And yes, I did mean for you to do the end-year evaluations, but I understand exactly what what you're talking about because it makes sense, how you're identifying some of the new goals, especially with the budget process. You mentioned, Dr. Moxley, your suggestion about approximately when a superintendent could or ought to begin. At what point, how long do you suggest, in your experience, how long do you suggest a new superintendent ought to be on board with you still interim, side by side, maybe as a consultant, to allow them to do school tours while you're doing the day-to-day until that person is ready to take over fully? How long do you suggest?
You know, that's a really hard question to really answer because everybody's needs, depending, if they're coming from out of state, you know, there might need to be some Florida transition things that you'd want to. If they're from Florida, they can hit the ground running, and it's really just getting to know Indian River County and the community, that type of thing. You know, 2 weeks can be pretty productive. Really just depends on what they need. Before I had a retirement date, so we worked within that, and there were times where I said that it was a little long, you know, in that situation. The individual was stellar, ready to hit the ground running. We needed to let her take over, you know, and you may have that person come in and be ready to go in 3 days or 2 weeks or whatever. You know, my timeline is pretty flexible. It's not that I have a definite retirement date or you're impacting that one way or the other. So if you wanted it to be 2 weeks, that's great. If you wanted it to be 1 week, that's great. If you wanted it to be 4, that's fine too. So you have a lot of flexibility there.
Okay.
Mrs. Justice?
Yeah, I just wanted to, just two things that, I didn't mention the Delphi method of evaluation. When we went through the interim superintendent evaluation, while I felt that it was productive because we did end up with a good result and a result in general resolution, I didn't feel that it was as professional or as well focused as it could have been, and I was intrigued by Hazard and Young and their work with working with individual board members to come up with a good evaluative process to bring us together for a end decision as far as moving forward with a candidate. I liked that, the idea of that and the way that they framed it, that all of the other issues aside, we would be coming together to focus solely on the choice of the superintendent. I liked that part of it. The other thing I wanted to mention was, and I touched on it, but I will touch on it again, FSBA will be working with several other districts in this state. While I know that they would love to tell us that every district will be their #1 priority district, I've worked in recruiting. Many of you may not know that, but I have dabbled in this world a bit, and I do know you want someone that's in your corner fighting for you, and you want to be the district that is being presented in the best way possible, just as any other company would be. Most companies that recruit for a CFO or CEO, large companies with large budgets such as ours, will use specifically a recruiting firm that is meant to go and recruit. So half of it will be advertising, and they will get candidates, but they will actively go out and recruit and sell your district. And I feel confident that Hazard and Young will be doing that for us. So again, I made the motion, it was seconded. We can continue in discussion. I would like to move forward to a vote if possible, Madam Chairwoman.
Are we, I don't think we're ready for that vote yet. I can appreciate wanting to move along, but I think this is such an important decision. But I can appreciate your choice, but I don't feel that the board's ready to move to a vote.
Can I say something?
Are you?
I'll agree with you. I think that's what tipped the scales for me, is they are only actively working with one district right now. That's why I specifically asked that question. And I think FSBA, although I do agree with you, I was leaning towards them before I came in here because I felt like they were going to give us that personal touch and that personal. I just feel like they might be stretching themselves by having 4 districts at the same time going through a recruiting process. And they're probably having the same pool of candidates in that whole time. So then it's a race of who gets done first. And that concerns me a little bit. I think also with FSBA, though, I really like them. I think that they like us. I think that they want to help us. I do. I don't think that their fees would go ridiculously high. So I have a quandary about it as well. But I think that after listening to both presentations and reading both packets, and slickness is also looked at by the people we're trying to get. And they're looking at the firm and they're looking at us saying, you know, what is this, how professional is this company? And both are very professional. I'm not saying that one is more than the other. But I do like the research development as far as the surveys. They've got a strong team behind them. If you read that in the packet, you'll see all the people that they use to be able to help with the search. So we not just get the two people that were sitting here, but we get a team behind them. So that was kind of a little bit of a tipping point for me. They do offer a due diligence fee package, which I think is important, especially with everything that's out there. I think that we need to look into doing a very deep, thorough check as to who we choose. So I'm throwing that out there now because I just think that that's something we should consider when we're looking at all the fees, is having that due diligence done. The travel, of course, tips on FSBA side. I think being local, being available, calling them anytime. I don't think that we can't call HYA anytime though either.
No.
I think they'd be available all the time. As far as the portal goes and the rules of the portal and all that, when candidates are applying for a job, they're out there and they know they're out there, especially on a search like this, especially in Florida. So if somebody does a request for record for something in that portal, that's available. So I'm not concerned so much about that. I just think they already have it set up and ready to go, which is kind of an advantage. So I still am leaning a little bit towards HYA.
Well, I definitely, we have that relationship with FSBA. We've spent a lot of time and they helped us through a very difficult time. And for that, I just, their professionalism and how they helped us through that, I will forever be grateful to that. And I know we are still members of FSBA. They are still there as our, if we have questions, they're there for us to reach out and we can still utilize them. And we still have them there for us. So that's not gonna go away. So I was definitely leaning toward FSBA coming in here just because we had worked with them and we know them, and it's that comfort of just, you know, putting on those comfortable pair of shoes. But with that being said, Hazard Young, I was very impressed with their model and how they go out and they recruit, and they do have that team behind them. All over the country, they said they have 100 associates. I don't think it's gonna be any problems picking up the phone and reaching out, and if we have questions, you know, it's the same level of professionalism. One thing we could look at if, you know, cost is a hindering point, is perhaps we can negotiate with them a couple more besides 4 days. Maybe we can negotiate with them to add a couple more days, since FSBA did offer unlimited. So that is something that we could do with Mrs. Diagresta, have her reach out to them and ask them if they would give us 2 or 3 more days to come in without it being the additional $1,000 a day, if that's something the board would be interested in.
Yeah, Mrs. Zork, they did say they would match another group. So if another group is going to tell us unlimited days, the only thing is, we're going to have to pay for their flights down here and their hotel and everything else. So think about, even with FSBA, every time we invite them in, or paying for all those?
No,
Well, that's-
sorry, no. FSBA,
With HYA, we're paying.
with
Both.
HYA.
With both?
FSBA, they come down there
Stay
and
in.
they stay locally, they have places to stay. They
I know,
said,
but
all
we're
we're paying is mileage for FSBA.
Can I ask a question? We're making a decision about a CEO for a $300 million enterprise. It's lovely that she has a teacher friend that she can stay with when she comes down, but that can't be, for me, that can't be a deciding factor. We answer to the community and to the taxpayers. $300 million enterprise, this needs to be a professional. I want to work with a company that's going to search, and they're lovely and they are professional, but that piece of it, you know, even if I got up at Taxpayers Association and spoke to this, I think the majority of the room will be in favor of an investment in finding the most highly qualified candidate to move us forward.
So, I don't know if that was you or Mrs. Barrenborg, but no, we would not want to keep incurring that cost of travel here, but I do see a benefit of just, if we did need it, to go ahead and negotiate that ahead of time, 2 or 3 more days, and have that fee waived. But I do agree with you with the travel. But like they said, when they come in, it could be 2 days. It doesn't have to be 2 travels, if you know what I mean.
Right.
You also have to keep in mind the community, if we were to go with community advocate a committee. If we were to have a committee of some sort, HYA would not have involvement in those committee meetings.
I disagree. I actually,
It's my turn, please, thank you. HYA, when I asked them specifically what their involvement would be, they deferred to the survey and said that they would help us to develop the committee, but that the rest of it would be up to us. And so we could tell them, we can instruct them to be a part of those committees, but we're paying for their travel for each one of those committees, and we're letting them know what we want as their involvement, whereas that is included, all of that is included, and FSBA has already had experience with with committees of this type. I'd also like to talk a moment real quick about some concerns with FSBA having 3 districts that they're working in, but they have 3 different team leaders. Each team leader gets their own district. So 1 team leader per district would have 1 district that they're handling essentially. And with us, one of them would have 2, and then 2 other people to lean on. With HYA, they have 1 district that they're currently working in, and then they'll have us, they'll have 2, and still another team member. So I don't think that that's an issue. I don't think that that should be an issue of discussion. I think they both would have the same amount of responsibility, and I don't see FSBA having a conflict. I think that if FSBA thought there would be a conflict, they would actually pull out and say, we have too much on our plate right now, we wouldn't be able to help you with this. I don't believe that they would lead us into, this process if they weren't gonna give 100% of their professionalism in our search for a superintendent. I also we may not even have discussion on this, but I just wanted to bring out something that I thought was interesting. In one of their HYA's brochures, the School District of Indian River County Superintendent Search Proposal brochure, I was kind of looking at the amount of superintendent search history with references going back from 2014. Just out of curiosity, the closer we get to our date, the less district searches, superintendent searches they have on their references. So it just seems to be whittling down. Now, we're halfway into 2019, but in 2018, I can't imagine that they got 3 times more districts on board from this time until December. It just seems to be whittled down to near 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, only 9 so far in 2009, and they only have 1 on their schedule right now. It's not my job to kind of analyze why they haven't had sufficient or searches, with references on their schedule as of this date. But we still have a long way to go in 2019, and based on their history, I would think by now this would have been much more, they would have filled up much more. So maybe it's the impersonal, I don't know what it is,
Okay.
but that's something to pay attention to.
Mrs. Justice?
I'm not sure where to start, but I would just like to say, as far as the planning part of that, my understanding when Hazard and Young spoke, and perhaps my fellow board members can correct me if I'm wrong, was that during the planning phase is really when we're going to decide how we go about engaging the community. And I think if a community committee is something that we'd like to do, and we bring that forward with Hazard and Young, they seem to really want to adapt to what the needs of this district were and what the needs of the school board members were and what we wanted. I have every confidence that if that is something we bring forward during the planning process, that not only will they be amenable to doing that, they will facilitate it in any way possible. And perhaps, Mrs. Dwork, did I hear them wrong when they said that, or did you hear that as well? They were going really to adapt the community input portion. They just stressed how important it was to have that at the beginning of the search, so we were well focused, not only in what the board wanted, but what the community wanted as well.
Yes. Mrs. Fahrenberg?
Yeah, I was looking at what you were just bringing us to, Ms. Rosario. And if you're looking at the histories, they're all about the same year to year to year. And then, of course, this year, you're probably not going to see a lot of them until about now, because right now is when everybody's starting to look for when their searches are. So I don't think looking at 2019 is fair on this. I think looking at the other years, you're going to see that they have a lot of searches. But I think this is by not just this 2 team members that we saw here, I think it's by their entire firm. And that's the other thing, is that they have an entire firm. So that's kind of what tipped me to them. I love FSBA. I think they've been wonderful to us. I do. That's why this is a tough decision, but you gotta look at it as, it's not a personal decision. This is a professional decision. And sometimes we get that mixed up. And I know in former positions I was in, it was really difficult to sometimes make the tough decision you had to make, knowing that it might hurt a friend or whatever. So we can't think about it that way. We got to think about it as, what firm out of the 2 is going to help us get the best candidate possible? And that also means the best candidate possible is going to look at what they're being offered on the other end. So you always have to remember that end of it too, is we can't just look at it from our side, we've got to look at it from the candidate side too.
Do you have something?
I just want to clarify that while I like both organizations, I am not making this decision because I happen to like FSBA personally.
I didn't say you
do,
were.
and
I
I
didn't
like-
say you were.
Yeah, I mean, I like working with them, and I have a comfort level because I've had that experience, but I am completely capable, and in the process of this decision, I'm by no means making the decision based on whether I like them personally or not. I'm making the decision based on what I think is in the best interest of the district. Also, inside of that, because I wasn't here for previous searches, but leading up to this search, I have had people, and I don't remember all of it because this has been a long year, but there is also the matter of public perception and the notion that we are able to look, to be less provincial than kind of what's in our own backyard. And there is a matter of public perception, and I think FSBA, can't think of the right word, but it is less attractive in that, because it is more attractive publicly for people to believe that we are as, wrong word, but as sophisticated as larger or other districts or out of the state, that we are not only able to consider what's in our own backyard. Doesn't mean what's in our own backyard isn't terrific, because it is. But there is an aspect of public perception in this, too. But the public isn't here, and I can't ask them how they feel about that at this moment. I'm not against Hazard and Young. I'm not. I think they'll be great. I have a comfort level with FSBA because I've worked with them, because they did help us through a difficult decision, and because when I have had other difficult decisions on this and I have looked for expertise, they've helped. That said, and they've helped in ways that have never, ever once steered me wrong. So I have a great deal of comfort with that, because I not only know from intuition, but I know from experience that they will steer me right. I have had that experience before. I don't know that with Hazard and Young yet. I have no reason to not believe that's true. I just don't know it. I just haven't experienced it. But I'm not against them. And I think there is something to also being broader than Florida. But, we'll do well with either of them, really.
Well, I think, my final thoughts on this, and then I'm finished speaking on this, I promise.
Don't have to be.
I thought I knew what I wanted for interim, and then having Dr. Moxley had opened my eyes that it's not really about Florida experience. It's not about, looking for someone that has fresh ideas from outside the state. I think it's really gonna come down to who are the applicants we're gonna get in. Because that's what's really is gonna matter. And I'm really, the more we're talking about it, I'm really getting excited about the thought of having not only the pool that we can pull from applicants here in Florida, and we know that it's going to be very competitive here really soon with Florida superintendents, but also the pool that we're going to get from out of state. And we do know that when we went through the interim, there were a couple of interim superintendents that I believe there was one from Missouri, and there was one from out west that was very appealing at the time of interim. So I think with the 100 associates behind Hazard Young, I think if we would just negotiate in the contract 3 additional days to come here, I feel very comfortable with Hazard Young, and that's not taking anything away from FSBA. I just think it just broadens the spectrum of applicants that we can pull into the district. That's my
To clarify, though, if we then, so we might have to then amend the motion, because if we vote to go with HYA based on the presumption that they'll give us 3 days, but we don't know that yet, does that mean it has to come back if we don't reach that negotiation?
I think,
Has to come back.
Mrs. D'Agresta, would you like to weigh in? Is this just part of negotiating the contract with them?
Well, you have a proposal from them, and so the pending motion is to approve the Hazard and Young proposal. If you would like to put clarifications around that proposal, that the contract must include 3 additional days for no additional cost, or whatever that is, then please make it a part of your motion.
So, no, I just want to say, I'm just curious. So they're giving us 4. I think 3 is too much to ask for. This is what's a capitalist society? I love capitalism. People are there. They're a service. They make money. It's not a charity. They're not doing us a favor. We're paying them to do a service. I expect a very good service for what we're paying for. So I don't have an issue in saying, I think 3 is too much. I think 1 day is 1 extra day is reasonable to ask for. I think you could say perhaps an additional day at $500 instead of $1,000. But I think at some point we have to recognize they are a business. They are here to make money. We want to utilize their services, and I respect that. right? I mean, you know, it's so funny. When I was growing up, we owned these businesses, right, and commercial businesses, and there was a cupcake store, and every time we go in, my dad they want to give us free cupcakes, and my dad said, you know, we'll pay for our cupcakes when we come, right? And when it's time for you to pay your rent, you pay your rent. This is how that works. So this is how this works too. We expect a service. I expect it to be the best service we can get. And if we have to pay for an additional day because we want a community committee assessment or whatever that is, it's $1,000. Let's pay it and let's do this right. That is my feeling on this. So I have no problem asking for an additional day or in the planning process. I happen to think they're probably watching this. When we go to planning, if Mrs. Rosario says it's very important to me to do a community committee, that's going to require an additional day of whatever, so be it. What's $1,000? Are we going to really, I mean, it's $1,000. A $300 million budget. And I don't say that lightly because we pay a lot of taxes.
It's $1,000 for the day. It's travel, it's hotel, and it's other expenses.
Well, we said if it was
so
2 days,
we spoke, so now
there
it's
wouldn't be duplicated travel. So, I mean, again, are we talking about $500, Mrs. Rosario? How much are we talking about, really? I mean, I feel like we're ready to vote at this point. We need to move forward.
No, I feel like you're ready to vote and you're ready to interrupt everybody who has a different opinion from you. That's what I feel is happening.
We've heard from you a lot.
Because it's actually
Okay.
said, you've actually interrupted many, including our council. So, as we continue, if we were to continue in this conversation, I think that we should table what we're discussing now until we get a deciding factor whether they're going to offer and match what FSBA is offering us. If they do not, if they match it, then it comes back to us for a vote. Right now, we can't vote on something that we don't know if they're going to agree to.
Mrs. Orr, can I speak?
Please.
Okay. How about we do this? We amend your motion and say, with the understanding that they'll give us one extra day. And let's ask for that. And if they don't, then we have the problem, we have to bring it back. But if they do, then we have it signed and delivered, and we can go ahead with
I'm
it.
willing to amend my motion to do that. Are you willing to
For one additional day?
I didn't say one additional.
No,
No,
I
I'm
know.
sorry. I'm
Your
suggesting
original
that.
was
Right.
3.
I'm suggesting one additional day.
I'd like to amend my motion, Mrs. Sork, to say that we contract with Hazard and Young for our superintendent search contingent upon them allowing us one additional day of consultation
In person?
in person.
Can we meet in the middle? 2?
No, I'm going to say one right now.
Okay.
I think Terry's right. This is a business.
I think one is I think is a good ask. It's doable.
I think we can negotiate during the planning process. If we really feel that we need an additional day, we can start negotiating with them and say, listen, we want an additional day. Will you do it for half? I really think that they're going to work with us. I think they want the job. They showed that today.
And I think they do want to work with us.
FSBA.
So just because we ask for 2 doesn't mean we're going to use the 2. But it's better to go ahead and ask now.
I don't want to lose the motion. I don't want to go through this again. I don't want to spend another 2.5 hours discussing this again. We ask for the one, we move forward in planning. But we've got to start moving forward.
Okay.
We're
well,
here to work. It doesn't matter how long we go through it and come back to it. We're here
Okay.
to work, and this is our job.
Well, let's,
As I
I
recall,
can't
this meeting was
second.
noticed till 5 o'clock. Am I incorrect in that? So,
so I cannot second that. I think 2 wouldn't hurt.
I'm willing to amend it for 1 and half price for the second day. How's that? You want to see if they'll go for that? I mean,
you know, we've had this conversation about this being a business. In a business, you negotiate. You've talked about you don't take free cupcakes, but in a business, we negotiate to get a deal for ourselves as an organization that we think best serves us as an organization. I'm willing to have that conversation. I don't think we need to shut it down. I don't think we need to be rude about it. I think we as an organization, it's incumbent on us to hire a firm given what we believe is best for our district. And I don't think we have to belittle that either.
okay, so I amend my motion for 2 additional days.
Okay, I second.
Great.
I second that.
For no additional compensation, excuse me, just so I can understand if I need to have a conversation with the company or not. the 2 additional days were for no additional compensation.
I amend my motion that we contract with Hazard and Young for 2 additional days of consultation for no additional compensation. Dr. Schiff's right, let's negotiate, let's see if they go for it. Maybe they will.
To clarify, that motion said we contract with them for 2 additional days. I think the motion is that we contract with Hazard and Young contingent on they will provide us 2 extra days in the cost that they've already, inside of the proposal they gave us. We're not contracting for 2 extra days, we're contracting contingent on, correct?
2 additional group consulting days is what we're looking at 6 total.
You have a motion to amend on the floor. It hasn't been seconded. But I'm hearing now a motion to amend the motion to amend. So if we could clean up, the
let's do
parliamentary, because I'm going to get lost in the motion in a minute. You had a pending motion to approve the proposal with Hazard and Young, which was seconded. You now have a motion to amend to have it include 2 additional days without compensation. Madam Chair, you're waiting for a second.
So the motion now is to contract with them with the inclusion of premised on the addition of 2 additional days, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
That's
And that's
the
what we're
pending
voting on,
motion.
and that's,
the
okay.
pending amendment, yes.
What is the rush? Why don't we wait to see what their response
I'll
is?
second
and
it.
then vote?
Okay. All in favor for Hazard and Young?
What you're
Or,
voting
I'm
on right
sorry.
now is the amendment.
Okay,
So the only thing you're voting on right now is whether you're going to amend the main motion to have it include 2 additional days for no additional compensation.
Okay.
That's all you're voting on. You're not voting on the main
Okay.
motion yet.
Got it.
okay.
Got it.
So
Thank you.
we're going to vote now on the amendment. All in favor?
Aye.
No.
4-1. Okay,
Now the main motion.
so now we need to vote on Hazard and Young as moving forward with Mrs. DeAgresta negotiating that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Okay, 4-1. Is that right, Mrs.?
I said aye.
Yes? No? Yes?
Yes, but
Yes.
I saw Ms. DeGresta look up at the
I was waiting to
negotiation.
hear voices.
Okay, got it. Not, oh, I'm negotiating this.
Right. No, I
Got
was waiting to hear
Right.
voices.
Okay,
Right.
But you've called the vote.
Yeah,
Thank you.
aye.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
I'll say aye.
Okay, so 4-1 with Mrs. Rosario descending.
And by the way, can I just respond to that? I'm descending this whole process. I'm not descending the fact that Hazard and Young are not going to do a good job, because I think that they're going to do a good job. I am descending this entire process. I don't understand why we're rushing.
We're
and
not
why we
rushing.
have to, we are rushing.
We're not rushing.
We could very easily ask for the response back to see if they will, rather than
We
this vote.
did ask the attorney to check,
And
and if they
then we
don't,
could
then,
vote on it.
then they'll come back to us. But we gotta move this on, so
But why do you
it's
have
the
to move it
same.
on now? Why move it on now?
Mrs.
We're
Rosario,
only meeting for the first time today
we are
on this.
moving on.
So I just
um,
want to go on record to say that I'm descending to this entire process.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna move on to discussion. We are 20 minutes till 5. We are not gonna have time to dive into the budget, but we do have another day set up to review the budget. When is
Yes,
that?
yes, board members, we have, next Tuesday is August the 13th, at the workshop session. The first hour is set, I believe starts at 1, from 1 to 2. We have the strategic plan review, picking up where we left off. And then from 2 to 3, we have a budget discussion as part of that. Now, that was looking at tying it to the strategic plan, but I think we can do the budget discussion, and then we can schedule another budget workshop, as many as you need, until we get to our final, which is September 10th.
Okay. Since it is the budget we have 10 minutes. Did Mr. Fagan, or did you want to, anything specific? Did you have any questions that you wanted to answer? No? Okay.
We didn't have any additional questions. I know board members, there are some various items that were brought up in just questions and answers and things like that, that we are still continuing to work on and make sure that everything is coded exactly the way it needs to be. Like, for example, there's some items that may be in one location and they need to be in each school's location, and they are working on those kinds of things. If there are any additional questions, board members, that you have that you would like us to work on, I think now would be a good time to bring those to light, because then we can work on those and have that updated on the 13th if you'd like.
I think all the board members have met with Mr. Fagan and has reviewed their questions with you that were going to be discussed here today. So why don't we, since we really don't have time
Sure,
for that, why
sure.
don't we dive into that on August 13th?
Okay.
Mrs. Orr,
Mm-hmm.
I'd just like to know, did every board member meet with him? Get a chance?
Every board member has not met with Mr.
Okay.
Fagan yet.
Okay, because I would say thank you very much to both of you for sitting with me and answering all my questions. I think they were a wealth of knowledge. I also think I brought up a couple of good questions that they're researching, and it was a really good back and forth. So if you haven't gotten to do that, I think it's worth your time to go in there and sit with him.
And I will ask Mrs. Poisel to reach out to remaining board members if you, to
Okay.
schedule time if
Sorry.
you desire to do that.
Sorry, I thought all the board members had. I think I saw a request go out, so, okay. All right, so we are, where did it go?
Board member matters.
Board member matters. I'm going to start here with Mrs. Justice.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Zork. I just want to say congratulations to Rachel Morey and Chris Kolstead. Over the time of being a board member here in Indian River County, I've had the privilege of being able to visit Pelican Island Elementary School and visit with Mr. Kolstead. His love for exceptional student education shines through. He has created amazing programs on his campus to nurture every student and unfold every student's full potential. I'm really excited to have him at Wabasso. I think he'll deal well with the parents. I think he's going to create some new and amazing opportunities for the students, and I really look forward to visiting with him on that campus. Rachel Morey was the assistant principal at Vero Beach Elementary School. I've also been able to spend some time there and work with her a little bit. What an exciting opportunity for her to go to Pelican Island Elementary. I think she'll build on the great work that Chris has done there and working with Mrs. Wagner, the assistant principal, and I'm excited to see how that school changes this year. I just want to take a minute and applaud Dr. Moxley, because you've been thoughtful and kind. The respect that you've shown to staff, not only in this office, but across the district, has been mentioned to me more than once. I appreciate your professionalism and really the love that you've grown to have for this district, because I think it's really evident in the decisions that you're making. And we appreciate that. I appreciate that as a school board member, but more importantly, I appreciate that as a mom. So thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Schiff?
No, ma'am.
Mrs. Rosario?
Last week, I attended the new teacher orientation, and it was really such a wonderful sight to see our curriculum and instruction department and the PD, the professional development department, actually put it together for the new teachers, and it was beautiful. It was wonderful. They had these really nice baskets full of classroom supplies, and it's like a new teacher's dream to see tape and a dry marker, markers for the dry board and construction paper and all kinds of different things, crayons. And it's just really, really nice to know that we're paying attention to the new teachers as they come in. I believe, Dr. Moxley, was it about a third or 2/3 of them were from out of county? Did we kind of get that?
I think 2/3 of them were experienced
2/3.
teachers, yeah.
2/3 were experienced teachers just coming from out of county, from someplace else into our county, and therefore they're in the new teacher orientation because they're new to our district. But everyone else were actually brand-new teachers. it was just a wonderful opportunity, so I was happy to be there. I also attended on Saturday Gifford Youth Achievement Center's back-to-school book bag giveaway of supplies. I didn't stay that long, but I was there long enough to show support, and they did a fantastic job, as always, handing out well-needed supplies to their students, or to the students that actually showed, as well as the Educational Foundation, their back-to-school bash on Saturday. I saw Dr. Moxley there, and it was really another sweet event, giving away school supplies and allowing the children from the theater. It was actually held at the Riverside Theater, thank you, at Riverside Theater, and the children who were in the summer program there actually presented, and they sang, and they did a little something in their singing, and it was adorable. Schools are open this week, teachers are in, and if there are any teachers who are chiming in, I just want to say welcome back, welcome to new school year. I know that you're all getting busy, cleaning your rooms and setting it up and getting prepared for your students to start next week, but you are all front and center, and I wish you all the best in all that you do, in all of your efforts. Our kids need you, and I look forward for the students beginning next week.
I'd just like to also say my congratulations to the two new principals. New principal and one transferring principal. It's exciting to become a principal. It's also exciting to take the helm of a new school, so I congratulate them and wish them well. I got to attend, I'm finally vertical in attending things, and I got to attend this morning the back-to-school event with all the teachers, and it was wonderful. And I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Long, Dr. Moxley, and Ms. Stampier for bringing almost Dr. Manny Scott to our district. He was an outstanding speaker, and I think he was exactly what we needed. And all I can say is be salty, and if you don't know what that means, you got to look it up. So.
Okay. I just want to say that it's been summer has been short. It seems like, I can't believe we're going back to school, and the kids are going back on Monday. When my kids were littler, I was the mom dancing down the aisle with the basket, like the most wonderful time of year. But now that they're older, I'm kind of sad that they're going back, because I enjoy
mixed feelings.
But with that being said, I do have two going into the Freshman Learning Center over at the high school, and we took a day and we went up, and I just want to highlight, we went up to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University up in Daytona. And the reason I want to mention this is because in 10th grade, we offer a dual enrollment with Embry-Riddle to our high school students, and it's such a fantastic program. And whenever I went through the tour, and as parents, we get down to, okay, how much? And whenever I saw that tuition there averages $50,000 a year, and I'm thinking, okay, if my kids can do the dual enrollment at Vero Beach High School or Sebastian High School, I'm looking at about $25,000 to a $30,000 savings. And I just want other parents that are out there, to check into it. If your kids are going, or your son or daughter is going into 10th grade this year, it starts at 10th grade. I think they have to have a 2.5 GPA to get in, and there's a slew of different classes that they can look at trying to get into, and I'm very excited about this program. It's a great opportunity, and I want all the parents out there to know about it and share it with other parents if your child's not interested in it. Lots happened, and I'm looking forward, and I think it's going to be a great school year coming up. So I appreciate staff and all the hard work you put in over the summer.
Yep.
So.
Well said.
All right, Dr. Moxley?
I just have one little comment, which is an important comment, because I didn't flip over my personnel appointments to highlight one individual. Rochard Morgan is a new assistant principal at Vero Beach High School. Eddie Robinson moved to Storm Grove, and so we had that vacancy, and Rochard Morgan, this will be his first assistant principalship, so we want to welcome him in, and that was my mistake not highlighting him before, so wanted to say congratulations, and since this will be a new appointment for him into the administrative ranks, I will invite him on August 13th, so I can introduce him.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much
All
for
right, with
today.
that, we're going to adjourn at 4:48.